You're live now.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Board of Directors meeting for Sherwood Forest Hospitals Trust, held in public on 3rd of August. I'd like to welcome everybody, those attending in person and those who are observing our board today. Declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any additional declarations other than those already declared in our trust register. Apologies for absence. No, we've got a full house today. Brilliant. That's excellent. And that's in summer season as well. Minutes of the meeting on the 6th of July. Happy to agree those as a true record. Yeah, thank you. And any matters arising from those? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So at 23/214, Barbara, you asked a question about some wording in the letter that we received from the care board in the oversight framework letter, and just queried the action that we'd been asked to make, which was to be a key contributor to the wider system as an anchor institution. So I followed that up with Amanda Sullivan, who wrote the letter, and she was clear that there's no suggestion that Sherwood isn't contributing well. It's a fairly new area, and the ICB are keen to bed that in. So it's something that all partner organised.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you for that clarity. And anything else? There's nothing on the action tracker. No, we're fine with that. Chair's report I will take as read, and just to say, you'll see that we also had we've got an attendance by one of our new governors today to observe, so welcome, and hopefully there are other governors who will be watching online as well. So it's great to see at our Council of Governors meeting on Monday this week such great attendance and such enthusiasm from those newly elected who want to be involved in our trust, and we look forward to them taking part in a lot of those activities. And I think everything else feels like a very long time ago in the chair's report, as always, but particularly at the moment. So thank you very much. Any questions, comments on anything? No. Okay, we'll move on to Chief Executive report. Paul.
Thank you. Morning, colleagues. I'll start just by noting the 2 periods of industrial action that took place over the last month, both significant, one being the longest period of industrial action, the NHS, and the other one being the first time the consultants had taken such action. And all periods of industrial action that we have gone through have resulted in a negative impact from a patient and colleague perspective, as well as financially. So thank you to all our colleagues who've stepped in and ensured that we delivered safe patient care, and that can continue as much as possible. And thank you to patients for their understanding of the disruption to their planned care appointments that inevitably took place. Clearly, there's further action now being planned for August. This has been extensively discussed at both the Quality Committee, which I was in attendance at, and I believe the People Committee, in respect to the increased risk that these 2 additional periods introduce. Dave, do you want to a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Morning, everyone. So obviously the stalemate between the British Medical Association and the government continues, which is disappointing. And the next period of junior doctor industrial action commences on 6:59 on the Friday the 11th of August and runs continuously through to 6:59 on Tuesday the 15th of August. So that's 4 full days. That's over a weekend. And board will note that obviously we're in a peak holiday period. So the planning's underway. Obviously, we've got a robust and tested process which involves our substantive staff, which is primarily our consultants and our SAS doctors, to staff a rota that we've devised to keep our patients safe and to ensure that our emergency pathway and inpatient pathways function. For this next period of junior doctor industrial action, the initial meetings that we started to have with our clinical chairs and our divisions, which I reiterate are in the early stages, the clinical chairs started to raise concerns about their ability to staff these rotas that we've devised. So at play in this is clearly the holiday period that I've referenced. I think one of the other factors that's playing out here is strike fatigue, and there is a recognition, I think, amongst the substantive staff that this has gone on for a long period of time, and this is having a material impact on them. Another compounding factor is that there is a new ruling that we're no longer able to engage locum staff to cover this period following a court ruling. So reiterate, this is relatively early in our planning, but what I would just highlight to board is that this is a material and palpable change in the confidence of our divisional teams, and I think that plays back into the comments that you were making earlier. This, of course, is then rapidly followed by the consultant industrial action, which starts at 6:59 on Thursday, the 24th of August, and that runs through till 6:59 on Saturday, the 26th of August. And whilst that's 2 straight days, it does lead into a bank holiday weekend. So in effect, that is giving us a 5-day shutdown as an organisation. And so I have expressed my concerns about our ability to assure around the adequate safety of our own patients, and there I have no concerns whatsoever about our emergency front door or new patients into the organisation. It's the existing patients who are in our wards, and much of this is the uncertainty. We've never had this length of shutdown before. We've never had a 5-day shutdown. We recognise that 4-day bank holidays for Christmas and Easter bank holiday shutdowns are difficult times for us as an organisation, and also much of this is the uncertainty. We don't know what the uptake by our consultant staff will be to support this industrial action. We know that in the initial period it was around 33%. Whether it's going to be at that same sort of level, in which case I think I could provide that assurance, or whether it's going to be substantially more, recognising that this is linked to a bank holiday weekend. And within this, there is a limited ability for us to mitigate that risk by finding additional staff, and that's what's causing, I guess, the concern. I guess I just also reflect that you may have seen that the HSJ published an article around BMA, what's called BMA rates, BMA rate cards, and just to update board, for the absence of doubt, in common with our surrounding organisations and following conversations with our ICB medical director, we matched our additional rates or escalated rates of pay to that of the Notts Healthcare Trust and NUH, and we had a locally agreed escalated industrial action rate card. This, of course, comes at a very significant cost to us as an organisation. Personally, I'm just grateful that we can manage to staff our rotas, and but we do recognise the cost it comes. Obviously, working through the next period of junior industrial actions, the peak holiday season, and all of the aspects I've mentioned, there is a significant cost to goodwill of our staff as a whole. Again, board probably wondering about that cost. I think it has been announced that the 4-day Easter shutdown, which is the latest data that's available, cost the NHS around £100 million in additional staffing costs. So very significant. Our local cost is still very significant. Rich, I don't know if you've got a sort of high level figure.
Yeah,
for what it is.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So over Q1, over the couple of periods of industrial action over Q1, the direct financial impact for Sherwood Forest was about 600,000. So that includes the additional costs of covering the gaps, the staffing gaps as Dave described. That also does include the estimated impact of cancelled activity and related income that will have been lost by the organisation. The indirect costs we haven't been able to cost up. So if we think about the consumption of management resources, for example, to plan for the periods and to manage the periods, they'll clearly have had an impact on divisional teams' bandwidth and ability to progress things like our financial improvement programme, which is obviously really important to our financial position. But those elements haven't been costed up.
And I started that piece with how disappointing it is that we're at a stalemate. I think I'd add to that it's now starting to become concerning to us, and that reflects the conversations in a number of the board subcommittees during the past month.
Thanks, Dave. That was important to play. I think some of the conversations that have been very detailed in the Quality and Improvement Committee, and indeed led to changes in the principal risk scores of those occasions. Okay, so back to my report, and we can pause for questions if there are any. So there was the publication of the NHS Workforce Plan. So very welcome and pleasing to see its consistency with our own people strategy, and we look forward to the long-term benefits outlined within the plan. During July, we took delivery of the new modular theatre facility at Newark. I'm sure you'll agree it looks pretty good, really exciting. My report makes reference to a great deal of partnership working that has been taking place over the last month in the mid-Nottinghamshire space and across the whole of Nottinghamshire. And this includes a joint paper, on behalf of the Provider Collaborative, which is being received by all Provider Collaborative partner boards and serves as an update on progress and an invitation for reflections for those who did attend the joint board session on the 30th of June, and support the direction of travel and the next steps outlined in the appendix. Lastly, Risk Committee reviewed BAF Board Assurance Framework Principal Risks 6 and 7, and with no recommendations to the change in the risk score. So happy to take any questions. I'm sure that the executive team can also answer more broadly any questions.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for the update. I personally think the wording of the balanced wording around the industrial action is really important, and totally support that. I think in the past, I'm probably looking at you, Dave, but the executive been able to provide assurance around the process and the way that the industrial action will be managed, and that's worked well. I think you're flagging potentially something different maybe coming up. So are we clear as we approach these next periods of industrial action, if it emerges that we are unable in some areas to provide safe care, are we clear on the actions that will be taken then, or the contingencies? Are they clearly mapped and we know what we do at each stage, or is it more a case of needing to react as we find out what the level of support for the action is?
So I'm going to bring Rachel in just a second, but I just reiterate to board that it's still relatively early in our planning of where we are. We have, certainly for the juniors industrial action, we have a good track record, a good understanding of the process, but it's then in effect it's getting names into the slots on the rota, which is where we're at the moment, and that's the work that the divisions are currently undertaking. Obviously there's an impact on our patients and our planned care work, which is then flows from that, but it's relatively early. But it's the material change in the mood music, if you like, from the organisation that I think is so tangibly different from this. In terms of, and again, Rob may be better to answer this than me, but in terms of what happens if we actually declare or decide that we don't have the appropriate staffing, I think there are a whole series of processes to go through before we get there, but there are no derogations from a BMA. currently stated. There are a small number of organisations who have on the day declared an area is deemed to be clinically unsafe and asked the BMA to allow to call their junior doctors back in. I think we're a long way from any of those sort of conversations, and it's a very small number that has been supported to date. Rob, is that fair?
That's correct, Dave. There is a mechanism, Steve, around seeking derogation.
Yeah.
Where we'd go through a regional approach with the BMA, so the British Medical Association, then up through to their national team. Dave said, I think there's been a handful, very small handful of organisations that have had successes with that, and it is really considered to be almost a last step in a process once processes internally have been exhausted. And clearly conversations continue to ongo across the system around mutual aid support where there may well be risk presented. I think it is a little bit early to tell at the moment. And clearly, I'm sure Rachel can perhaps share some reflections on some of the planning that's going in now, as we speak.
Happy to. So the divisions are working on their rotas at the moment, and we're reviewing all of those on Monday. So we have because we've done this so many times now, we have a really established process that effectively generates a heat map that shows us by shift, day, night, day of the week, exactly what the coverage is in each clinical area. I think, as Dave said, this is going to be a lot more challenging this time, so it may be about looking at what that sort of real minimum standard of safety is, as opposed to what we would like to be able to cover, which is what we've done in previous strikes. I think the challenge around not going to be being able to use agency staff adds another dimension to this. We can use bank staff, Rob, can't we? And actually our reliance on pure agency hasn't been really high in previous strikes, so it will affect us, but I don't think it will be catastrophic. But obviously until we've got those heat maps back, it's quite hard to tell. And these are difficult conversations for the divisions, because we're having to sensitively ask people whether whether they are planning to strike or not. Some staff don't want to tell us, some staff do, and it's those individual conversations that need to be handled very sensitively, and that takes time. So by Monday we should have a reasonably clear view, but it may not be a final position because some of those conversations will be ongoing. Dave's right, the derogation process in place, whilst there are no national derogations, we cannot seek derogations in advance. So even if on Monday we know that a particular area is going to be particularly badly hit, we have to plan for that. We cannot then seek a derogation from the BMA. That can only be done on the day of action if there is a particular patient safety issue that is not associated with the strike. So very, very limited in terms of the scope there. So I don't think there's an easy answer to this to say, yes, we've absolutely got all the mitigations in place. We will work through those. We have a whole command structure in place that includes, I chair that, Dave can feel, absolutely alongside me on that. The divisions all represented, all of our corporate teams represented, and we run that through the weekend as well. So some of this is about dealing with those escalations as they arise.
Thank you. So I think we've been assured before of the process that's working. I think what we're saying is that's going to be tested even further this time, but the process is still the right one and it's in place. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think just two other points I'd make is that we were obviously nervous in the first period of junior industrial action of putting our substantive staff on call on the front line overnight, and we bolstered some of that support for them, but we may not be able to provide that now. But there again, this is the 5th period of industrial action, so everyone's pretty familiar to it. I think the other point I would make is that we've just had the new rotation of our junior doctors. Paul and I went down to welcome them yesterday. I did reference industrial action, but we've no idea what their uptake of industrial action will be. The last consistently through the industrial action, it's been running about 80 to 86%, I would say, of uptake. I suspect they will be up there, but we don't know who and how many. And we did, whilst they have no obligation to tell us, I did make the point that we will ask about who is intending to strike to help plan.
Okay, thank you.
Andy.
Thanks, Dave and Rachel. That's a helpful update. given the concerns you've raised, are we doing enough on safety? So are we being proactive enough around prevention and detection for this period of time, or are we going to wait and follow the normal governance routes with things coming through when we do it retrospectively? So I'm thinking about safety huddles, other things that we should be doing or have as part of our escalation, given the concerns you've raised.
So I think we've been nervous all along, Andy, to be honest with you, and so we've put a number of those processes in place. So every single meeting that we have starts with the initial question is, does anyone have any immediate patient safety concerns? That's the very first question when we start every single meeting. So I think it has been at the forefront of our planning and the forefront of our processes. In terms of other aspects, we've had very little concerns raised. There have been some, I describe them as teething issues, but we've had very little significant safety concerns to date. Again, I think some of this is uncertain what's going to play out within the next few days. I think I have absolute confidence in all of our colleagues that they are empowered to escalate and to flag the slightest suggestion of any safety concerns. And as part of that, I include our nursing colleagues, our AHP colleagues, but let me bring in Phil.
In answer to your questions, Randy, we do put more resource and supporting from other teams that are maybe not affected, so extra and senior nursing rotors, extra matron rotors, and do some of those safety walkarounds. We have the digital team out and about, so we try and get those teams that are not directly affected to provide some additional wraparound and support. Through quality committee, we did have a look at, did we see an increase in incidents or harms? We didn't during that period, but it's really hard to quantify stuff you don't know about, particularly as Dave said, the patients that were not getting through the elective pathways. There's probably as much, if not more, risk in that group as well. But certainly over that period of industrial action, we do put a lot of additional support, visibility, and those sort of safety conversations, safety huddles at various points of the shift.
Thank you.
Okay, Ali.
I just want to ask, perhaps all three of you really, about learning from these episodes. So there was considerable amount of learning in making procedures slicker during COVID. What I'm keen for is there any learning that can be translated going forward into winter when we're going to have pressures start fairly soon? And how are we going to translate that into better productivity?
So we know when we've got, particularly in the junior doctor strike, when we've got more consultants on the wards, we have seen better flow on those days, and after a couple of days we often end up in sort of almost like an Opal 1, Opal 2 type situation. We took the opportunity towards the end of the last junior strike to almost do a bit of a control study. So the faculty who are currently reviewing the OPJ programme with the view to relaunching that soon, what we asked them to do is almost go out on the wards and shadow board rounds on the last day of the junior strike when the consultants were running those, and then the next day when we had all the juniors back on the ward, so we could see a direct comparison between those two very different models. Now I think we have to be careful we don't jump to the conclusion that if we just have our consultants out on the wards all of the time, we will fix everything, because actually they're doing that at the expense of outpatient clinics, elective activity and so on. So it isn't quite that simple, but I think it's more than just having senior decision makers. It's about the way they work, the order they do things in, how we act very quickly on progressing patients through the pathways. So we haven't got that back yet. We should have that sort of in the next week or so, as David's team are sort of presenting back to us the results of that. But absolutely, that's designed to try and capture what those key differences are. So I think there is lots of learning, but we just have to be a little bit cautious that we don't. Some of the learning is stuff that we can't replicate outside of an extraordinary situation like that. So it's how we capture the really good practice and work out how we embed that in normal business as usual practice.
My learning is industrial action is bad for our patients, yeah, bad for the NHS as a whole.
Yeah. Manji.
Well, following on the same theme, I was going to ask, I'd be interested in all the execs' views, is, you know, at the moment with so many uncontrollables and so on, a key concern for us is a culture that can rapidly move from barely surviving to feeling we're drowning. And our role as leaders, what is a single opportunity each of you see to try and keep it at a thriving culture rather than shifting from surviving to drowning culture?
Is that to me, Manjeet?
Because you may have different views, these views. You know,
All they contribute.
Yeah.
I think it's a really challenging question, isn't it? I mean, in spite of the pressures that everybody's working under and the concerns that David's really clearly articulated, I still see a really sort of can-do and collaborative culture amongst our divisional teams that are facing every challenge head on, and as Alice pointed out, trying to work out what we can learn, where can we get the positives out of this, and then apply that to how we make things better for our patients in the longer term. I think we all have a role as leaders in keeping people buoyant in what are very difficult circumstances, and to some degree, I think that the strike fatigue that Dave's described that applies to maybe our medical workforce, I think we're probably all feeling that to a degree, but we have to keep people positive, don't we? And I'm continually impressed by the positive and can-do attitudes of all of our leadership teams in this respect. So I'm not sure I can give you a specific answer, but I don't know, do you want to?
Well, what I would say is that one of the things that I think we've done exceptionally well is our communication and our engagement of our medical workforce at different levels. So we've continued to have, in effect, open forums to allow people to drop in to ask questions. And we bring not just members of the senior HR team or the medical directors team, we also bring the BMA into those conversations and have a transparent conversation. I think our relationship with our LNC is very strong. In fact, I met the chair of the LNC last night again to go through some of these aspects and clarify some of these aspects. And I think that helps for the consultant body to feel as though their voice is being heard. And to feel as though they do have a say in this. I think the board should not underestimate the impact that this industrial action is going to have on the medical workforce going forwards. This may be a really, really significant force in what happens to the NHS in future years. And the longer it goes on, the worse that will be, which is, you know, my flippant comment to Ali about it's bad for the NHS is exactly the message we need to make sure that both sides hear and understand.
I think as well we have to be mindful this isn't, because it doesn't just affect the medical workforce. So the theatre nurses or the outpatient staff who can't get on with the the elective activity and the patients that they're committed to treating. All of our leadership teams, to be honest, who are having to spend much of their time planning for these strikes when actually they'd be rather be getting on some of the improvement we need to do against a whole range of indicators. We'll talk about some of the challenges we've got in the IPR later. So I think it impacts right across the board, doesn't it?
Just take Phil.
So building on Rachel's points there, Manji, I am always impressed by the amount of other work and things people are still leading and doing and driving forward. It'd be very easy to say this is all we're focused on, which it is to some degree. People are still using any opportunity to do something that's an improvement piece of work or benefits our patients or benefits our staff. And talking to colleagues in other organisations isn't like that everywhere. I think that's the leadership of our teams and the desire to still do all the stuff that matters to our patients. And I think that's really impressive, and I definitely hold on to.
To Andrew, and then you will come back in.
Only just a general point, just as a board, is there anything else we can do to support you this time?
I think we get that support and understanding from you, but we are having to make daily decisions about things that we consciously are not going to do, which is probably not how we normally work or like to work. So sometimes we can all maybe drop a ball. We're conscious deciding which one to drop, and then the next day you've got to pick it up and drop another one. So I think the understanding and these conversations are helpful, but accepting that things will go off track, things cannot get done, and we cannot, and we're not using that as an excuse to not do something. I think we demonstrate that, but it is, as Kate said many times, this is almost like a 3-week cycle. At best, we've got a week where we might be able to go back to, you know, we've still got committees to service and things to do and lead and teams to manage, and we've got a huge workforce. So it's that's, as leaders, I think the exec team, that's something that plays in our minds, because we're not always on the stuff we'd like to be on at the level we would, but I'm comfortable that we've got our priorities right and we're doing the right stuff.
So for me, I think the board are senior leaders within our society. That's why you're on the board. And so using your networks to just escalate into those forums that might perhaps move the entrenched positions would be really helpful.
Is there any way we can help reduce your workload, you know, in the sense, best meetings?
One of the things is using our membership of NHS providers and other organisations to continually impress upon both sides that we need to find a solution to this quickly. Yes.
Just thank you. So Andrew just mentioned meetings and capacity, and we learned a lot of this through pandemic, really, about how we stood down swathes of meetings, and in some cases lost the pace and focusing in terms of governance. As a result, that resulted in manifestation of patient safety risk. But what it did do is we lost the drumbeat of getting that discipline into governance. And what we're really keen to do, and what we've maintained through the periods of industrial action, is we review the meetings that are in senior leaders' diaries. We ensure they're focused on governance, clinical safety, patient safety, etc., and maybe stand down some of the agenda items that can be deferred. So we do that. But we're clear that we've learned the lesson from the pandemic, that we don't just take things out of diaries because some of this, we lose the importance of some of the governance that we do.
Rob, Davies, is your contribution added to this? Otherwise, I'm going to move on if you've got one.
I was only making the point about how us as an executive team and the teams we lead have remained visible during some of these periods, Manjeet. I think we all recognise the importance of a thank you in regards to the efforts teams, leaders are taking forward during some of that period you've described. That's the only point to mention.
David.
And just quickly to build on Rob's point, Manjeet, it will be really easy for us to recall within our own trenches and work in silos, but as an executive, actually all I see and feel is us coming together stronger to say, you know, we want to do the right things for the right reasons, and you know, that real strength, I think, sends, you know, hopefully some hope to the organisation that we care, you know, and we're in this together.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anything else on your report?
Further to add. Thank you.
Great. Right, so let's move on to strategic priorities, Q1 update. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. So in your pack, you've got the first Q1 position of the strategic priorities for 23-24, so this year, which we as a board approved in April. Just to recap and remind, they map against so each of our strategic objectives, and they consist of a mixture of priorities that move us towards our new strategy development. So there's some recovery and maintenance, which, as Rachel said, we'll probably talk about later in terms of performance. And then there are some developmental priorities in there, so a balanced mix. Each priority, a reminder, has been mapped against a subcommittee, so chairs and members of the relevant subcommittees ought to be familiar with the content of these priorities, and we've used again in agreement with board the dials to demonstrate progress on the front sheet. That's something that we got feedback from you that you welcomed in previous last year. Individual execs may wish to add any comment on particular ones. My overall assessment is that there's good progress being made across the priorities. Many are on track, and where we are off track, I think as an executive we understand that there are mitigations being put in place to bring that back online for the next quarter's summary. So I don't think I've got a particular area of concern. There's obviously a whole host of concern in the detail below that should be going through subcommittee. Thank you.
Okay. Start with Ali and then to Graham.
Can I just refer you to page 7, 1.3 in the paper? And so this target is off track. I suppose what I'd like to see is where there are statements which are vague, like increasing the number of patients using SDEC. Can we have a target? So how many patients are there in the baseline? And what do we aspire to, and over what period of time? And similarly for the other bullet points in that section, please.
Yes, we can. I mean, a lot of the metrics in here replicate the metrics in the IPR. So SDEC, for example, there's a national standard of 33%. We're already overachieving that at 37. Around Christmas time, all being well in terms of some estate works, we should introduce a surgical SDEC, which we don't have now, which will improve further. So we can try and be more specific in the metrics.
Particularly around virtual wards, which was in the newspaper again this weekend.
Yeah.
It seems to be
so again,
successful elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just really, I think there's a lot of good news here in the sense that we look to be on track with everything, and there's an element to me that then questions, and it's a bit connected with what Ali was saying, where we're heading with some of these. So that what do we know is successful outcome? Where are we on that programme? So if I highlight one which I mentioned to David earlier on, embed the improvement faculty within the trust, just getting it established, yes, understand that, and yes, we're agreeing on that, but actually visibly seeing anything coming from that and making a difference on areas, I'm not seeing that at this moment in time, and it just makes me question, is it really green or is it not at this stage? I'm not sure where we're supposed to be on that trajectory going forward, and it's getting that into this a little bit more in some way, so it actually has some meaning about where we're heading and where we are on that development, if you like.
I've got more contribution. Do you want to come back in now, though?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Yeah, thanks. Fair point, Graham. Thank you. So two things for me. One, I'm a little bit cautious about adding lots of metrics to this because otherwise it becomes the next BAF or the next performance report. So I would exercise. I think we've got some thinking to do as a collective outside of here as to what is it we want to see in here, because otherwise, you know, it just becomes another version of BAF. So that's one thing for us to think about in the development piece of this. And then secondly, on specifically on the improvement faculty. So the plan that we've got agreed in the improvement faculty journey was that by Q2 we'd have a combined team. And so we're green on that measure because we do now have a combined team. And by Q1 in the plan, it said that the improvement faculty will have assessed all the programmes viability and that has been undertaken. So I think there's a timing issue for this. So the People, Culture and Improvement Cabinet will receive a summary of all of those assessments of the programmes that have been completed in quarter. We'll do that detail through that subcommittee, and obviously that will then come through to board. So I think there's a bit about visibility, I think is a right and proper point. I think there's something about timing of getting some of that through the subcommittees, and I think there's a degree of caution about not turning this into another board assurance framework would be my recommendation. Happy to be challenged back on it.
Thanks. So I suppose what I'm really keen is that we learn from these conversations to shape the strategy that we'll have for next year. And I'm mindful too of the comments that we heard from some of our governors on Monday evening about having smart objectives, which would move us from the narrative-based approach to one that's focused on outputs and even better outcomes. Because we'll do that critique of what's here. And I think this is, and I think what I'm looking for is actually quite different from a BAF. And we're talking about strategy for the trust and what we're hoping to achieve for the trust.
Steve and then Matthew.
Thank you. It's probably on a similar line, but looking at this report and then looking at the IPR later that I know to get into now, this feels pretty positive. The IPR feels pretty red. And is there a feeling amongst the exec that if we achieve these priorities, these are the things that are going to have that big impact? So not everything will land at once, but in a year's time, the IPR will look considerably greener because we've done these things. Even though you're saying make sure this doesn't become another BAF, a lot of priorities here. So are there certain work streams or areas that we really need to focus on that would make the biggest difference on performance? Or actually, can we do all of these and we have capacity to make everything happen at once? I don't know.
Okay. Do you want to pick up some of those?
So I understand the connection between this paper and the later paper. However, my initial thought was this is about strategic objectives, not about delivering operational targets. So the actions in here aren't necessarily designed and connected to delivering mandatory metrics and of operational performance. They are the key actions that will take us into, that will deliver our strategic objectives. I know there's an implicitly there is a link, but not explicitly one leads to the other. So just got that in my mind as I was thinking through your question. There are some specifics in here that would lead to that, but there are many other actions that are taking place in an operational sense that would lead to improvements in operational performance. So we're not capturing everything in here.
No,
and your last question about bandwidth is a really good question. It's something that we often return to in an executive team conversation around. So how do we create a band? Clearly, there's industrial action gets in the way of some of this. So it is something that we often return to, and in some senses have to prioritise. As Phil was suggesting earlier, some days we have to drop a ball and pick it up the next day, and that's the reality of it. However, these were the priorities that we agreed as a board were the really important milestones on a journey. Some of them certainly the improvement faculty, which was the point of the earlier question. This was an objective about putting the building blocks in place for an effective improvement faculty, and what that can give in terms of transformation and improvement to the organisation. That will lead to improved metrics in performance. But whilst we're putting the faculty together and it's achieving those, let's say, the milestones within there that describe how it's coming together, what's the governance around it, it's not actually dealing with the delivery of actions that would lead Tier 1 to the improvement in the metrics. We're not quite there yet. Does that help?
It does. Rachel might help a bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a bit of blurring though between what I would regard as business as usual. We have to deliver to our operational planning guidance this year, which is heavily weighted on many of those operational metrics around planned care, urgent care and so on, which naturally overlaps very heavily with the IPR. There's possibly something for us to reflect on, I think, in terms of are we bringing enough separation between those what I call business as usual metrics that we have to deliver and the strategic programme that will be things like the CDC and the TIF that are big pieces of work that we're doing that will help to take us on that journey, but they're not the only thing. And I think maybe we're sort of blurring the two a little bit. So we can take that back and reflect on that, I think. And that probably builds on Ali's point about the metrics, because what we're trying not to do in here is replicate the IPR, but then by definition you don't get enough clarity around the outcomes for these particular indicators. So I think maybe it might be a bit of a presentational thing, I think, but as to where we focus on particular issues, and it might become clearer when we do, because obviously the IPR this month is a new version which has a much broader range of operational standards in it, because that is the way the planning guidance is focused, and we're trying to align that very much with the ICS focus. I think we're moving into a slightly different sort of approach to what we've seen at board in previous years.
Manjeet.
Yeah, just carrying on that thread of conversation, I think some of this, I'll use the improvement faculty conversation just for consistency. I think in some of them at the beginning, the success measures are very outcome focused, because, you know, at the board level, we need to be outcome focused. If we look at the improvement faculty, the success measures are very input focused. Now, that may be relevant for the first line of assurance, and as an exec management, you need that sort of assurance as the first line of assurance. But at the board level and for ourselves, some of the outcome measures I'd like to see is what would an effective improvement faculty look like? So if I use the success measure fortnight matrix meeting established, now that's an input measure, but what would effectiveness look like if that worked effectively? So it's the outcome measures for what effectiveness would look like for an improvement faculty is what I think would be helpful to see here at the board level report, because then we can better relate it to the soft, because that's, you know, it's that what we're trying to relate it to. And some of the success measures earlier on do relate it to the soft, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'll take that away. I think that's a fair point, Mandy. I think as Paul said, I think this is a timing issue. We have to get the faculty up and running. We have to get the governance in place. So some of those inputs are what we need now. As you rightly say, we need to move that on, don't we? Start demonstrating how, you know, the benefit of coming together and having a huddle in the improvement faculty means, you know, culturally you start to get improvement into the mindset. You have a weekly focus on improvement. So they're the sort of outcomes that we're getting as a result of that. But it's early days, and we'll build that into Q2. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. We'll move on to our strategic objective one, providing outstanding care in the right place and the right time. Paula, come and join us for our maternity update.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So I'll take you through the two reports and now starting with the Safety Champions update, and this is for July's activity. And as always, I'll pull out a few key points to bring the board's attention. It's worth noting our new maternity voice champion partner has started. Always been a key role that we've always sort of shared the success of that role with boards. I think we need to monitor and see how that continues to develop with the new member in there. It's going to be really key this coming year as one of our LMNS objectives from the maternity framework is around embedding the woman's voice. So it's going to be really key to see how that develops. Continue with our maternity safety champion walkarounds on our forum, supported by Claire as board champion and Paul as CEO. And we continue to get that honest and open blend of feedback, the good, the bad and the ugly, I would say, but it's really good that people are telling us what we need to hear, not just what we want to hear. Some really positive things around the badging out, how that's really getting embedded now. Some frustrations with equipment and things which we've been able to respond to. Some mixed feedback about the elective section list, which we'll touch on later, but certainly some improvement around that change process. Gave us a chance to share the Enton Ops report and some of the actions we were taking and engage the team in that. And there was a real buzz around the upcoming staff excellence event, which was the week I think we went round. So really powerful and important visits and forums those. Ockenden review is planned for October, so that'll be a local review to ensure that the 7 IEAs that we've brought forward before remain embedded. We meet monthly, we've got robust processes, so we welcome the regional team coming and just giving us that peer review and sense checking those. In Appendix 1, we've included just our overview of our NHSI Year 5 programme, just to give you some assurance around the programmes of work, and we track those through their own committee into Maternity Assurance Committee. So early in Year 5, we've got a really robust process, and that's all on track at the moment. Saving babies' lives, I think we touched on it in your report last month, Claire. We had a visit from NHSE around the tobacco dependency team. So really good piece of work that's getting that national recognition. And we always like to include some of the quality improvement work that's going on, because maternity for me lead the way within my team, certainly. So much quality improvement going on in there, and some examples in there about the early breast milk initiative. And I think another QI piece of work is that elective section list that we brought in, the continual PDSA cycle. We've got some people following the pathway through to see if we can make those continued improvements, building on the feedback from our mothers and families and also our staff. I'll come on to the scorecard, and we'll stop and take questions on both. Scorecard, you'll note that 3 and 4 degree tears are static. There's been a slight drop in the massive obstetric hemorrhage, but only by 1 month. But there's those big pieces of improvement work that we're doing as a system that we've touched on at previous boards. So we need to continue to engage with those, make the improvements and watch and see how those progress. We've got Q1's data now for the elective sections, which Paul is going to take a paper to the next quality committee. But, we set a target of 3 sections a list, and I think it's coming out at 2.9. So some really good work and some good data that we need to interrogate. I'll bring Paula in and then pause for questions.
Yeah, so really, thanks, Phil. You've touched on a key point. The elective section work we've had a focus on this month and looking at it from both angles. So looking at the feedback from our women. So Emma is our new maternity voice champion. We'd asked if she specifically focus on that feedback on the ward. We've had some really positive around the actual process. The areas we could improve really focused on the discharge and how we can improve on that. So our teams are looking at that, because I think for me that's something we can really we could improve on quite quickly. It's not anything that's not within our gift to improve. The work, so from the staff feedback, again, they're all very pro the elective section list. This is something that's been a long time in the making. What we've got, the main concern around is the variation, because we know we've got different teams working different days, and it's about how we can reduce that. So we've got some really clear, simple goals that we've now put in place. The team followed the list through yesterday with these new goals, and it worked really, really well. So all 3 sections were completed before midday, which was absolutely fantastic. So it's just putting that effort into that quality improvement work, and the data that's come through, these improvements have showed that we've, like I said, got the 2.9 sections per day our average, which is absolutely fantastic. So really impressive. What we have seen is looking at our data that our elective sections, which is with the national trend, previously we were probably lower elective, but now we're seeing that we're probably about a half and half, so half elective, half emergency. And we know with a change with the national guidance, NICE guidance around the choice for elective caesarean, that this is coming in. It is the national picture. So I think we've got some further work to do, particularly around the list, but it's good to see that we've seen that improvement. Thank you. Yes, Andrew.
Can I just ask, I think it's transitional care service, the slides come.
Yes.
It's red. Can you just give me a bit of background on that, please?
So transitional care is the neonatal care that we provide. So the transitional care is babies that are stepping down from neonatal unit, or the babies that might need additional care, but they're not needing to be on the neonatal unit. But so we have a nurse on there. This is for us. It's we had to pause during COVID because of the mixing of staff, etc. The main ethos of the service is that we don't separate women and baby, and that provide that service on the ward. What we've got a problem with at the moment is recruitment to neonatal unit, in that it's a smaller team and we've got a significant amount of maternity leave. So what we have done is just over recruited. We've got a new lead in there that's taking back on the service. So we are providing it, but limited at the moment. So at the moment we provide it for babies that are receiving IV antibiotics and need to stay a longer length of time, so they're staying on the ward. The next step, which is the next phase once the new starters start, beginning of September, is that we'll start taking the babies that are 34 weeks back onto maternity wards. So there is a plan in place. Against NHSR, we can have, as long as we've got the signed off plan, that will support us, but we have to be safe with the staffing, and because of this high significant amount of maternity leave, it's hindered our neonatal unit slightly. Okay.
Just to labour the point about elective sections, so board will be aware that it's taken us a period of time to deliver this, and we are rightly, I think, pleased and proud of the service that's being provided. And it came at a significant investment cost. But I didn't arrange this, but by chance on the maternity assurance committee, the last one, we had an obstetrician, we had an anaesthetist, and we had a patient member who were all three independently raving about the quality of care and the impact that the elective section list had made, and things that were coming out, such as the ability to do this work, the teaching opportunities that this was also affording, and how that was stimulating the services from the different aspects. I thought that was a really powerful story that came across.
No other questions, Tom? Thank you.
Later.
Very much.
Thank you.
Okay. On to our empower and support our people to be the best they can be, and we are joined by Kerry, our Freedom to Speak Up guardian. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
So I'm here to present an overview of the Freedom to Speak Up, reflecting the last 2 quarters since I last visited board in January. So we've had 60 concerns raised in the last 2 quarters, which demonstrates consistent engagement with Freedom to Speak Up. And pleasingly, most of those concerns were openly raised, which I think is a real positive. 43 were raised openly, against 16 confidentially. So I think that's just a real good marker that people are actually coming forward and happy to be known to the next person, if you like, along in the chain. Whereas before we always used to have a sort of a 50-50 split of people that wanted to raise in confidence without being named, and you know, further down that route didn't want to be identified. So I think that's a positive thing, that people are actually trusting the process and believe that actually solutions can be found. The profile of people, again, nursing, midwifery, admin, clerical colleagues raised the most concerns, but there has been an increase in this quarter of medical colleagues and AHP colleagues that have come forward, which is welcome, because these groups historically have been less represented in Freedom to Speak Up at Sherwood. There seems we've had colleagues with disabilities raising more concerns, but fall into the sort of 3 categories really that revolve around behaviours, well-being, and as I say, appropriate behaviours at work. So this has been a little bit of an uptick in the last couple of quarters, and this has been fed back to our EDI lead, who is doing some educational work, and our senior people team are supporting those people that did raise concerns regarding their disability in the workplace. The biggest category, worker safety and wellbeing, has 25 concerns. These are the National Guidance Office aligned categories. Probably an uptick in those because actually the bullying and harassment concerns have reduced. Some of those will tip into more sort of the wellbeing categories rather than the bullying and harassment when we look at the cases from now going forward. Most concerns relate to people's experience at work, and some of that does still focus around our leadership and actually our first steps in listening up. So when people approach their line managers, it is a little bit about how that conversation goes, sets the tone for, you know, everything that happens next. And that appears to be still a barrier for many people. Unchallenged behaviours. So again, that's that bit about people raise a concern but feel that there's no change or see no change in their team, to the impact that has on them from a wellbeing perspective. Inappropriate behaviours and attitudes, again, is our second lot of concerns. And again, this is a bit down to also how these things are managed when they incur in teams, and leadership's confidence to sort of actually deal with that in the here and now, rather than let's see how things goes type approach. Favouritism is another one that comes consistently to Freedom to Speak Up, including our interview and recruitment processes. People feeling that it's unfair at times and that it's not particularly inclusive, and that career development isn't equal. These are the ones that feed into that category. We had a case of detriment from speaking up in the last 2 quarters. and this was an investigation was led by Barbara, our senior independent director, into that, and was concluded there was no detriment for speaking up. So we do report detriment cases to the NGO, and in that case, we found that there was no detriment had occurred from speaking up. And now included in our new policy, we do have a section on detriment, because that wasn't included before. If people feel that they have, been disadvantaged from speaking up, what do they do about it? So that now is in our policy that has just been ratified with JSPF. Our triangulation and learning routes, so quite a lot going on, quite a lot of new things that have happened, which is great. Bullying harassment cases that haven't been resolved have executive oversight or are in people team processes. Looking at our data regarding colleagues with disability, I'm working quite closely with our EDI lead on how we understand that and how we educate our line managers, and encourage colleagues to identify and speak up a bit more about their disability and how it affects them in the workplace. And I think we're seeing that in our data coming forward, that those colleagues do need that extra support, and we're hoping that with the launch of the health passport later on this year, that will help colleagues in their workplace with their line manager or moving around positions, that it will be a bit more open and a bit more person-centric in terms of looking at adjustments, etc., and opportunities for them. Doing a lot of work with our senior people team in terms of coaching for people to speak up to the line managers where they feel that they haven't got confidence to do so, and the people team are supporting those conversations, as well as obviously supporting the leadership teams in that progress. The National Staff Survey results, so looking at actually where we sit in terms of our speak up questions, although there's been a bit of a dip nationally in people's confidence to speak up related to staff survey questions, Sherwood sits well above the average for that. They do release now what we call a Freedom Speak Up sub-score as part of the national survey. We sit at 6.9 and the average is 6.4, and actually for acute and community trust, this puts us in the top five nationally in terms of the speak up questions for the national staff survey. So although there has been a bit of a downtrend in people speaking up generally, Sherwood is benchmarking quite well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, great.
Thank you, Carrie, and a really encouraging report, and particularly like, as you highlighted, that we only have the one anonymous concern, and I think that shows a lot of, in terms of the openness and understanding how we work through. I think what I would like to see a little bit more of coming through at the back end, you've got some quotes at the end, but it's sort of lessons learned, but it's sort of talking to those that have raised the concerns afterwards. Did they feel the support they got was the right level of support? How did they feel about the outcome from it? Is there anything we could do better and learn from? And then there is that kind of lessons learned element for some of those areas. Does something come out of this that we can think about, and we need to do something on a wider basis, not just because that particular individual that's been raised? Is it something that we need to think about as an organisation? And it's getting those lessons learned through and seeing how successful and how the staff that have gone through this process have felt as a consequence of it, and get a little bit more of that, because I think we can make a big thing of that and how we work that through, and I hope that would also help to encourage others to come forward where necessary as well.
Yeah, I think now that we've got that bit where people are moving to, they're quite open about it.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was very quiet, and people didn't want to be recognised or identified. I think there's a potential now that some people perhaps would be happy to share their story, I think, in that wider context.
It doesn't need to be sharing it so that everybody sees it.
No,
it's just
but what their reflections of it.
Their reflections of it,
yeah,
and picking those up.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, lots of interest now. Barbara, Steve, and then Manjeet will come to you.
Thanks, Kerry. So every time we get a report, it's good to see how this area of work is maturing, because that's what it feels like we're seeing every time, just a little bit more on that journey. So my question really is, given that you've got all the board's attention, lots of people nodding with lots of interest around this, is there anything that you would particularly like to do or press forward with on this agenda that you would like support from us with?
So most of the concerns that as I say, as I mentioned before, they hit the barriers at the first step. So it's a bit about, you know, whoever's listening to them has to get that conversation right. But otherwise, you know, I'd say, you know, 50% of what I hear wouldn't make it to my door. So it's that again about, and obviously there is the NGO has, you know, asked you know, organisations to ensure that they give speak up and listen up training to all of their staff. And actually that's about getting some of those fundamentals right, and looking at some of the concerns. And you know, I spoke to Rob about this, about how, you know, mandatory training is difficult to shoehorn that in, because, you know, it's not, you know, it's not mandatory, but it's actually in terms of, are we ensure that our managers or that first person's getting that conversation right? You know, if we give people those actual basic fundamentals in how you listen to somebody and how you don't,
Yes.
yeah, well, I think will actually prevent a lot of people, you know, people's well-being, etc., being affected in the workplace. So it's that consideration of, you know, how can we get that to our line managers at whatever, you know, level that is. Some trusts are rolling that out, that becomes mandatory for all of their staff. So new starters joining will all get that training, and others are doing it, as I say, through, you know, through other mechanisms they've got the trust to actually make sure that every person in the organisation has had the basics in, you know, in what Speak Up is about and how to receive and speak up. So as I say, we've put some of the fundamentals into the new leadership training programme that's being launched later in the year. So the leadership fundamentals courses, the developing leaders, the existing leaders plans. There is freedom to talk a little bit in there, which I'll be able to sort of try and, you know, share this and try and put that. But actually, you know, we capture everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you. So again, reflect the positives about the maturity and the agenda improving all the time. It's a question about culture. How do you think in general managers view concerns being raised? Because a traditional culture might look at the graph saying, well, we've had 10 in medicine and 2 in wherever, and kind of go, well, 10's bad, but actually it probably isn't. So do you think a manager now would feel, if a concern is raised in their area, that that's good news because they're a good leader, because they're obviously open to listening, or they'd feel they're going to be on the naughty step for having had a complaint raised? How are we getting on with that shift?
I could see some shift. As I say, I've been in post 2 years now, and I can see some of that shift. And this quarter specifically, I've had divisions actually come to me and say, will you help us with some listening up that we're doing? So some of their improvement plans that they're doing, they're actually saying, you know, come along, tell them what Freedom Speak Up is. You know, I really want them to talk to me, but if they're not happy to talk to me, I'd like to sort of present you as an alternative. And that you know, that's the first, which I think is good. So actually, you know, CSTO have come and asked, you know, for support with 3 teams in terms of listening to sort of as part of their improvement plan. So that's really good. Of course, we're always going to get people that feel that, you know, if people contact me, they're concerned as why they didn't go to them.
Yes, sure.
And as I say, you know, that still does occur, but you know, I can see that we you know, that balance is shifting a little bit. People are actually thinking, you know, that's fine to have a conversation. Don't mind who you have a conversation with, just have it. And I think that's a good thing that I've seen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But firstly, Graham, I've taken on board what you've said for People Committee about the outcomes of transferable learning and so on. I also wanted to say, like everybody else, seeing that maturity, not just the consistency, because, you know, sometimes with a speaking up culture, the starting point is people largely report management processes and controls. And the fact we've got to people feeling confident now talking about behaviours, that really is a good maturity. And the continuous improvement approach you have within your reports. Every report is constantly building on the last. It's not a simple, you know, transactional report each time. So thank you very much, Kerry, for that. Two things that I've got in terms of questions. One is based on our walkabouts and also from the chair and governors at our walkabouts and service line, is the violence, abuse and harassment, particularly in areas, you know, A&E and so on. So any thoughts there about what more we could do, and have we got more champions in those areas maybe? When you say more champions. The second was, you know, we've had a lot of assurance about how well you work with other areas, the equality, diversity leads and the well-being areas and so on. I wonder whether you're plugged into the latest leadership development programs that we had at People Committee in terms of those behaviours.
Yeah,
concerns coming out.
Yeah, so the new leadership development framework has got freedom to speak up, running through that, and I've been invited to be part of those sessions from the very basic fundamental courses to the existing leaders. So that's in the planning. So that's great. So I think that will help me, you know, share some, like you say, first-hand experience of how you do have a conversation and how you don't, which I think, you know, is going to be really useful. The bit about our areas that are experiencing those higher levels of bullying and harassment. We haven't got champions in UNEC particularly. You know, as I say, that might be something that we might need to focus on. We have got champions over at Newark because we knew that we were represented at Newark, so we've got teachers ready to be trained for Newark in the nursing workforce. So that I think that will help those areas over there to sort of, as I say, have that representation of you know, it's okay to speak up. But as I say, you know, I'm part of obviously the people subgroups about bullying and harassment workforce and trying to sort of how we that people know that they can speak up about that. I think people do speak up about it. I think, you know, it's something that doesn't directly come through freedom to speak up when they've experienced, you know, bullying and harassment from the patients or the families. I think they're quite well supported to speak up about that locally, know the processes for that. I guess the bit that I get is the bullying harassment they may feel from colleagues and or, you know, their team around them. Of course, use it there, escalated individually, and quite senior oversight of that process. So.
Okay, Phil, then Rob?
Yeah.
Actually, that might be better, Rob.
Yeah, let Rob come in. Thanks. So, thanks, Kerry. We had quite an extensive conversation with People Committee last week, but for other non-members of the committee, I think particularly that leadership offer is key to some of this conversation, and I know you've been linking with the team, Connell in particular, about how we start to weave some of that in, whether it's a new leader, whether that's an existing leader, etc. Certainly feel, you know, there is a further opportunity to support you in getting some wider champion voices. You know, you just talked about the correlation between not so many champions within UEC, and we've got low numbers in that area. So you've certainly got my support, and I'm sure other board members' support to perhaps do some positive action there, and how we can just, you know, support those messages further. And I think the other bit linked to all of this, which is particularly some of that violence and aggression agenda, is we've committed within the work cycle of the People Committee to have a quarterly focus on this starting in September, how we use data to start to inform decisions a little bit more, but more importantly, where we do a bit more wraparound support for individuals that no doubt come up against challenges, difficulties. So some really positive stuff. So thanks, Kerry, and, you know, certainly my support and the team's support about how we can perhaps just focus a bit more positive action.
Yeah, first point is around that balance and aggression work that Rob's mentioned. I think there is a lot of work going on. It's not necessarily consistent or standardised, and it's scattergun. So the work that myself and Rob are doing will hopefully provide some visibility on what is happening, but also identifies what we need to focus on, with support of, you know, things like comms, training. There's a whole series of pillars under that work. So yeah, that will go through committee in September. And the other bit I was thinking about was Graham's example about we do our examples of where we follow this through. So thinking of one, I've got an increase again in nursing midwifery in terms of concerns raised, and the theme within that tends to be about people feeling unsafe or working in areas outside of their sphere. When we've unpicked that, this is about people being asked to move on a daily basis to plug gaps on, you know, we've got those extra awards open. That requires a mammoth task every day, every shift, to move people around multiple times to make sure we've got a safe coverage of our own staff alongside bank and agency. And people want to work with their own team, don't they, and in their own area. So we start to unpick what's at the root of this. And actually, when you talk to the staff involved, and Kerry's good at flagging these with me, most understand why they've had to go. It's the way in which they were sent there, or the way the message was delivered, or so that's that bit about communication. And what Kerry's doing now is some targeted training with our senior team and leads, because, you know, your point about should it be mandatory? We can't make everything mandatory and we can't reach everyone, but targeting those areas where we know, you know, we've got the biggest gains, and you're doing that work with our matrons and our sister chargers, the people that are asking these staff to move. So we're good to see if we start to see some. I think it's important to understand it, like you say, going out the themes and demonstrate some.
Something like that you can make into quite a good case study as well, and to be able to show how, starting through freedom to speak up, these bits have been issued. We've learned this from it, we've questioned and inquired about it, and we're now changing our processes
back to
a little bit. And it's, as you say, it's often about how it's communicated, isn't it?
Yeah, we're
That's such a big difference.
Ask people to work in really unpalatable, difficult situations, and maybe the increase in the medical concerns, maybe because same thing, Dave, asking people to work in areas outside of their sphere in work patterns and ways that we, you know, we don't normally do.
Great. I'm good opportunity now. Bring you in, Dave.
I don't know if I should ask this really, but I think it's a really helpful report, and I particularly like that we're starting to get a metric, because I think that one of the things that I struggle with is what does good look like for freedom to speak up, and as that metric matures over the over time nationally, that will be, I think, helpful for us. It's clearly a powerful voice. It's a powerful route. You have the undivided attention board. Do you think you've come across any examples of behaviours of using the freedom to speak up route?
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Say that again.
Well, it's a powerful voice that immediately connects into the executive team or the trust board.
Yeah.
And so there is a potential that people might see that as a route of circumnavigating a whole host of other things.
Normal process.
And possibly taking or saying things that perhaps we wouldn't normally come across.
Yeah.
I think it comes in the. I think some people come to me and usually it's the ones that probably, you know, stick in the confidential pile that actually don't go anywhere. They don't want to do anything about it. They just want me to know about it. And you know, those are few and far between. You know, because usually processes have already taken place, or something's happened, like you say, something's been concluded, or investigation's gone on, or something's been concluded, but it may not have gone in their favour. So actually they think, well, coming to tell me about it may do something different. But usually there's nowhere to take those cases or to go with it apart from sort of listen and, you know, acknowledge their experience, if you like. I don't feel people. I think people genuinely use the route that feel, and even if they have gone, maybe circumnavigated a process, it's understanding why they have. And I think, you know, some people may have engaged in a process and not got the outcome they want, but there's still things that can be learned about. And it's usually the things about things have happened, has happened as it should do. But what care did they have in that process is usually what they're talking about, or they feel that the impact of the well-being. So they come, even though they may, you know, you may think that, OK, they're not happy with outcomes and they're not going there for the reasons they cite. But I think it's unpicked in terms of what we do at the next steps. And I hope that because the majority of the people are allowing me to take a next step, whether that's escalation to yourselves or divisional leads or occupational health and wellbeing teams, you know, if there was something like that they were using it for malicious reasons, that would be found out. You know, so I generally think most people are using it for the right reasons.
Sure.
Yeah, and that is just, I think, like you say, they either can't speak up to where they need to speak up to be, or they have and they feel that nothing's really changed, and it's that, you know, fear and futility type thing that comes to
that pool of unprogressed work.
Yeah.
That might be an interesting group to do some analytics on.
Added up to people committee, yeah, because 2 years ago we did seek a lot of assurance about not bypassing processes, and some of this is as much about what could be the learning of the effectiveness of some of the processes as well.
Thank you. I think that's been a very helpful discussion. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you. Good. So we move now on to our patient story. Just making sure the video's set up while I'm joined by colleagues. So I think it's Caroline.
Caroline Robinson's one of our senior ODP educators and theatre. I've got a small cake lurking there as well.
Come on,
Okay.
you are.
HPV.
Come and be supportive. You have to sit up there. Hold your hand, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, the stories don't need much introduction, they normally tell themselves, but this is a patient story. But the key bit on this really is about the role, and often forgotten and unknown role, of the ODP around this patient's journey. I think that will become really evident. So that's the bit I wanted to sort of to focus on, and then I'm sure you'll be able to supplement it.
Any questions or anything at the end? And I'm sure there's a few people in here that know all about theatres. A few have joined us already.
I don't know about you.
No, but ask any questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Caroline Robinson. I'm the clinical education lead in theatres at Kingsmill Hospital. My background is as an operating department practitioner. Operating department practitioners work within 3 areas of the operating theatre. They work within anaesthetics, surgery and recovery. As you can see in this video, our patient talks about their experience within theatres at Sherwood Forest hospitals. Generally, patients have no recollection of what happens to them when they come to theatres. In Gay's story, she was in theatres for a lot longer than would have been expected for the procedure she was having. A lot actually happens behind the scenes during a patient's operation. Our theatre teams are working really hard behind the scenes to ensure that your operation goes really smoothly and is as safe as possibly can be. Our theatre teams are highly trained in all aspects of theatre care and can respond to any situation that may unfold in front of them.
Hi, my name's Gay Summers and I've recently had a gallbladder removal. I had my pre-op at Newark Hospital, but I had my procedure at Kingsmill Hospital. So when I went onto the ward, a healthcare came and did my observations, and then the doctor came in and said that they were running a little bit behind. So they kept me up to date just so that I didn't worry about waiting.
The scrub practitioner is the person that you never really see. We're quite often scrubbed a long time before you actually make it into operating theatre from the anaesthetic room. However, the role is very important because we act as your advocate between the rest of the medical professional teams. We're there to provide, prepare and make ready the equipment for your surgical procedure. We work hand in hand with the surgeons and we're quite often a step ahead of them because the anticipatory skills have to be quite high so that we can perform surgery in the safest possible manner for you.
Once we've done our checks, we have a team brief. So in this team brief, we discuss all relevant information regarding our patient's journey. So anything that could be any unforeseen circumstances, what we would need for those.
When I went down to theatre, the operation should have lasted probably 2.5 to 3 hours, but it ended up being nearly 8 hours because I woke up all confused thinking, why am I still in recovery?
Part of my role is just to calm them down and to reassure them that they are okay, that the operation has gone as planned. Obviously, if something happened, I would let the surgeon or one of the surgical team come and speak to them.
So it was about 8:30 in the evening when I looked at the clock and I thought, oh, that's a bit strange. The nurse, whose name was Louise, she was lovely. She explained that there'd been a few complications and they were keeping me down in recovery until I was right because I was on a little bit of oxygen, but they were reassuring me all the way through. The next morning, the doctor came in to see me to see if I was okay and if I'd got any issues or anything. And I did tell her that I didn't sleep very well because I kept waking up. And she said that was the issue with my theatre, because she said that sounds right because it looks like you've got sleep apnea. So she explained everything to me, and I've got a CPAP machine now, which helps me breathe during the evening, which I didn't think I needed. So all in all, with my experience of having an operation at Kingsmill, it's all been very positive. The care I received from coming in today's case, that was fine. Going into theatre, speaking to the anaesthetics, they were great. And in recovery, they explained everything when I came round because of how long I was in there. And then I stayed overnight and the doctor came to see me the next day and she explained everything to me. And I can't say anything wrong about my experience. It was fine. And I'm 100% recovered. Best thing I've ever done.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you've learnt a lot more about what actually happens behind the scenes in the operating theatre during your surgical procedure. The ODP role is a very diverse role, covering anaesthetic surgery and recovery. And if you are interested in taking up a career as an ODP, please contact me and we can discuss this further and see what options are available to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Caroline. Any questions from the board? I think that was be enlightening for a lot of our members of the public who've been watching that video to understand the role of the ODP. And I know that you've also been recruiting recently at the Step Into the NHS activities and explaining to people, and that's the feedback I've had through contacts outside of the hospital is that was really exciting to hear about those roles, particularly because lots of people, as we saw from that patient, just assume that they are doctors, nurses or healthcare of one sort or another. So that definition of the role is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Caroline, and bringing it to life, and thanks for taking the time to support myself and some of our executive colleagues through the same journey when we saw all that in action. So thank you for doing that. And then the last time we had a conversation was at the Step Into the NHS event, and there was quite a lot of interest. So that's down to you and your passion and your commitment. So thank you.
Manjeet and Dave.
Yeah, likewise, thanks. I was wondering whether it was open to the public, so I felt that it's good news for recruitment and the public and so on. I've got more a curious question. Why are scrub practitioners called scrub practitioners? I've always been curious about that.
People used to refer to them as scrub nurses, and because they're operating department practitioners, that practitioner could be a nurse or it could be an operating department. What
does the word scrub mean? Why scrub?
Because they are scrubbing into for the instruments, so people, so you are passing the instruments, you are scrubbing in the exact same for surgeon. But some of the scrub practitioners also are surgical first assistants, so some of them, one might be doing the instrument side of it, or maybe assisting the surgeon as well. So there are those other extended roles to operating department practitioners.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. But any questions?
Dave.
I was just going for board's information. So Caroline's been really quite gentle about the importance of her role. So we don't allow the Royal College of Anaesthetists, the Association of the Anaesthetists, they don't allow any operation to go ahead without someone who has Caroline's skills being present in the operating theatre, such as the importance of their role. And it's something, it's an example of a core member of a team that we often don't sing or build up as much as we should, and there's often a shortage of colleagues who have Caroline's skills, and often we run into problems with managing to run our operating theatres because we don't have an ODP available. So absolutely key for the safe running of our services. Have I said that right?
Yeah, I was going to say there is a national shortage of ODPs. ODPs will never be out of a job, but the problem is it's bringing them into it and recognising the profession really. That's what we've been trying to do, and the profession's been around for many years. It's just that, like you said earlier, actually, about people know about doctors and nurses, but operating department practitioners, or ODPs as we call them. Actually, we just need to raise the profile, and that's the thing for me, which is what we've been trying to do with the work we've been doing with allied health professionals across the trust. And there are lots of events actually over the years that we've done to try and promote it. But and that's the thing for me, we just need that push to promote professions, I think.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you. So again, sort of eye-opening. I'd heard how important you were. It helps to kind of see why that is. So thank you for that.
We won't be getting your operation if we if you didn't have an anaesthetic practitioner, whether that be a nurse or an operating department practitioner.
Yeah, no, exactly. Thank you. So with the view that you've got, do you feel you get the opportunity to feed into how we can continually improve, whether that's patient safety or efficiency or operations are carried out?
In what sense do you mean?
Well, it strikes me that even any operation is going to be complex. Some are even more complex. So getting everything right in the right order, having everything ready, making sure the patient is well communicated to. There's just so many parts of the role,
yes.
And presumably they could be done in different ways. So,
yes.
So do you get an opportunity to feedback or talk about how things could be done better?
We have our own we have meetings within theatre to discuss. We have our own patient safety and governance within theatre, so we have those discussions. So we meet up regularly with the teams to discuss. So, so that everybody at every level is involved. It's not just about operating department practitioners.
Yeah.
It's about the rest of the theatre team.
Yeah.
So we do, and we meet with the anaesthetic side as well as surgery.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Andy.
Thank you. That's really helpful. In my experience, I think the ODPs are people who make the biggest experience to patient experience. So, because I'm in the trade, I know who the ODPs are, but when I've had surgery, they're the people who've made the experience really understandable and human. So with that in mind, what would your colleagues say are the 3 key messages they wanted you to get to us as board today? So what are the key things we should know about ODPs and what we should be doing for ODPs over the next 5 years?
I think the big thing they would say, and I would say as an ODP as well, is we really need to promote the profession. We really need, and I think it's about marketing it. I think the biggest problem for me over the last few years on with recruitment, and also bringing the students, because obviously we now got apprenticeship ODP within the trust, and that's we're on our 2nd and 3rd cohort of ODPs. I think it's looking at the forward plan, especially with NHS workforce planning. We're looking at different trainees coming through and the input into the allied health professionals. Need to be really pushing ODPs and getting more and looking at that, you know, like over the next 5 years. We've got a rolling programme for ODPs to come in. So I think it's about promoting it and getting the right people into the jobs, because the external students that are coming in, they're from outside this catchment area, so they'll be from Sheffield and Hallam University, and it's difficult for us to keep those staff here because then they want to get. So what we need is marketing from the trust to put the adverts out locally, so that we bring the local community, the local, you know, people into this profession from locally. Then the staff will stay. Our biggest problem is we've been losing students. We've trained them, and they've gone off to other hospitals. I think. So promoting it would be a good thing. Looking at senior advanced roles, I think that's the big thing that the ODPs would be saying. We need to be, you know, once you're qualified as an ODP, what's that career progression? Looking at, so that would be the thing. It's investing in those careers, advanced clinical practitioners, physicians, associates. I think that's the big thing, because there's obviously a shortage of anaesthetists at the minute. I think we may have missed the point where we should have been starting looking at that a little bit before. So for those that don't know what physicians associates are, it's an operating department practitioner that's gone on to do further training and can actually give the anaesthetics and be overseen by a consultant anaesthetist. So it's further training, and this is a career move for an ODP if they want to advance their skills. And I think there's a shortage. I don't think it's been thought of enough here at this trust.
Can I just add to that, if I may? One of the comments that I often get back from the team is that there is a certain point you can get to, and then in order to progress, because there isn't that enhanced route, they sort of step outside of theatres, and we've got quite a few ODPs doing other roles in digital and health education England and things. I think it's something we really need to look at if we want a unique selling point, bringing these people into our organisation and retaining them. We've got to have a look at what the enhanced roles or progression looks like.
I think that's a good marketing thing, and I've always said that if you want to recruit as the ODPs into theatres, knowing that there's something else for them to go to, you could be a physician's associate or you could be an advanced clinical practitioner. All the advanced roles, they're really important, and that will bring people in. If they know that in a hospital up the road have got these availabilities of these additional roles, then they're going to go there. So, at the moment, we've got a shortage, I think, of 10 ODPs at the minute. We've got agency within theatres, so we need to start looking at how can we get them to come in.
We have done international recruitment as well, haven't we? We've recruited 2 so far.
Yeah, we've actually got the 4th. Actually, we've just got over the last 2 weeks. From India, we've had 4 staff anaesthetic practitioners come in. Actually, working out really well. Obviously, we need to be looking at growing our own staff as well, and looking how we can keep them.
Graham, did you want to come in?
Yeah, you've largely answered what I was going to ask as a general question, which is who we think we should be targeting to bring into it, and it's about thinking about the different marketing approaches and communication approaches to each of those cohorts, how we play it. But the one that particularly stands out for me within that is looking externally, and it's probably conversations with Nottingham Trent University in particular, rather than Sheffield Hallam, for all the reasons you just said, but working closely with Trent and looking at how we can encourage more nursing side of it and wanting to go into the ODP.
It's not from nursing, ODPs, is it?
It's sort of beyond that.
Oh, yes.
So would some of that be potentially trained through Trent?
No, so Trent don't offer that at the moment. So Derby, so for the apprenticeship, the internals, that would be Derby that we use at the moment. The externals, the undergraduates come from Sheffield Hallam. I would be looking for a better quality of course as well. There is that. So we look at what they're offering and how long it's a 3-year degree course, but the time in practice is a bit of a problem for me. So I am wanting to look at Leicester University as well, looking at Leicester for their students. So we could probably look at other universities to bring their students in. But, people from the local area could attend Leicester. So a lot of it's online learning, but
they could, but it's also then about having those conversations directly with the universities to actually.
I've got contacts within the universities. I have it.
Brilliant.
And I think that longer term and all the work that's being done with West Notts and Trent to see about the longer term, what we can design, what we think there is as a demand.
Conversations with NTM about bringing in things like HP cadets at a younger age to get the experience. Unfortunately, theatres is the one area that you've got to be a bit careful about under 18s.
Yes.
For, partly from traumatic side of them experiencing it. But so we are in conversation, but really we need something a lot more local to help support us with this.
Yeah,
so
there's also to make sure you've got the senior support in taking that forward and working through.
We could actually just think about what you just said. We had a discussion about bringing because it's the 16-year-olds at school that you need to be looking at. They want to know about the profession and they don't know what this profession is.
No.
Which is why we've been doing a lot of these, the promoting the NHS really. That's really good. But if we could do like a weekend and bring them into the day case theatres and let them look around, let them get scrubbed up, let them see it and they get a bit excited about it, and sort of promote it that way, outside of operating times, that would be good for us. That's probably the only way that we could do it for a 16-year-old that potentially is looking at a career.
Yeah. No doubt your enthusiasm for this. I think we can all see that and how much you're committed to helping us the trust to get this right and to recruit for the future. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and your team and Kate, and please thank your colleagues as well across the ODPs
Very much.
for all that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Right, so I'm going to take a bit of a break now, and let's come back at 5:02. Which is a little bit, few minutes long. We'll come back at 5:02. Thank you.
Yeah.
welcome back. Thank you very much. And for a good session so far this morning. So we are going to move on to our integrated performance report, a quarterly report. As you remember, we moved earlier this year to quarterly discussions of what was the SOP, and now is the integrated performance report. I'm going to hand over to Paul to take us through that.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks Claire. As you declared, this is a report for the trust for the first quarter of the new financial year in the new format, places a single oversight framework, and we continue to report against and within the 4 domains of quality care, people and culture, timely care and best value care. We've increased the number of indicators for consistency with the operational standards, and also the reporting at the Integrated Care Board and to NHS England. I suppose an overall commentary that I'd place on the performance for the first quarter, which has been an incredibly challenging time across the whole of the NHS, not least for the periods of industrial action that we discussed quite at length earlier, is that we continue to benchmark well in some key areas that are described in the report. Those being emergency care access, vacancies and sickness absence, ambulance turnaround times, and indeed in those areas of cancer waiting times and diagnostic times. There are, however, in the increased number of metrics and standards being reported against, some issues that you might want to more explanation on as to why we're not achieving the standard. But what I would say in an overall sense is that what you're seeing here is greater transparency, not a deterioration in performance since the previous quarter, which was reported in a different format. So please be assured of that, and I'll invite my executive colleagues to give detail in the individual domains in the sort of the usual way. So I'll hand over immediately to Dave and to Phil to take us through the quality care domain.
Thanks, Paul. And I guess I'd just sort of build on that and remind the board of the intense activity and the intense distraction that all of our teams are experiencing related to the industrial action. And it has a very significant impact, as we've discussed a number of times before, very significant impact on our ability to progress, change, to improve. What I would say about the IPR is that, as Paul says, whilst a number of the metrics are off track, there remains a primary focus on quality and safety, and that is reflected in our update. And I think I would also reflect that comes at a cost to my other executive colleagues, that actually we are demanding that primary focus on that particular domain. And again, it's worth just reflecting on that. So I'll hand over to Phil first, and then I'll pick up the last standard we were going to talk about.
Thanks, David. Absolutely right. I think that the focus on quality and desire to improve is what we've touched on already this morning. And while we want to point out to board's attention some of the areas that are perhaps off track and we need to focus on, I think it's keen to look at the whole suite of metrics as well, look at them as a whole. One that I particularly want to point out to board is the continued improvement with our falls position. And I think that's been something we've discussed over the last 12 months. And it's that focus now on proactive work, preventing patients from deconditioning, focus on mobilisation, all those other important pieces of work, rather than just looking at falls and fall numbers. A lot of work to do and a long way to go, but I think it's really pleasing to see that we start to see some improvement against the backdrop of more patients and more vulnerable patients in the organisation, and patients being held in extra capacity areas and in busy, crowded EDs. So I think it's really pleasing to see that. There's 3 off track in particular we wanted to bring to your attention through the flash report. So to start with C. difficile, we can continue to see that up and down trend, but certainly an increase in numbers of C. diff. That's a national picture, and as a region, where the region seems to be having the largest problem with that, within the region, we're not seeing any more cases than our colleagues. We held a regional event last week, a learning event just down the road in Derbyshire, to try and look at some shared learnings, the things we're doing or colleagues are doing that would help improve this position, the things we're missing. That included a bit of a tabletop review of our policies, our outbreak management, and then we're going to have a peer review in the coming weeks from the NHSE regional team to come and walk our pathways and just to see if there's anything that we can do differently. Out of that listening event last week, there wasn't a great deal that we're not already doing, which is reassuring, but something about how when we look at these RCAs or these cases of infection, we need to go further back and involve our system colleagues. There's no point just focusing on the period of care, you know, during the time in hospital, what happened last admission or what happened, you know, GP prescribed some antibiotics. So how we do that wider piece of system learning, looking at the patient pathway in its entirety, and absolutely need to focus on fundamentals internally, good IPC practices, and touched on this before post-COVID. There's lots of other infections we need to be aware of. That whole suite of training with our teams and focus has continued on. Working well with MediRest, who are reviewing all their cleaning standards to make sure that we're getting the right cleaning in the right areas to the standard and frequency we need, which has been a really good piece of partnership working from MediRest and colleagues in Vicious Division. We've touched on before about the challenge of not being able to have a full decamp programme where we can empty a ward for a period of weeks, but what we have done is continue the deep clean programme. It's not been able to be done at the same pace, but we've managed to do Newark and Mansfield hospitals in their entirety, and we've done some key areas in the Kings Mill site, and we're going to have a discussion and share our plan at DLT next Tuesday about how with our ops and divisional teams we can fast forward the next phase and prioritise in areas and try and get that done over the coming weeks. Something probably worth noting as well, which I think, Claire, you may have seen on one of your walkarounds, is our decontamination team. So we've got that in-house decontamination team, which are an exceptional, another one of these hidden teams who clean our mattresses internally, make sure that they're clean to the standard we need, to turn around at pace so our patients have got access to air and pressure relieving mattresses. And that's something previously we had to send externally. And when we had outbreaks of C. diff before, one of the things that was identified was not having access to that service. So that's in-house, it's still functioning, it's really key to note, and that's something from the learning event that other colleagues are taking away to try and replicate. So rates remain high, lots of focus, lots of work to give you some assurance on that. Move on to dementia. This is no longer a mandatory reporting field. We identified something we wanted to focus on. And hopefully by bringing the board story last month, we showed you some of the good work that's going on. We showed you some of the work and some of the focus that we feel is still needed within our dementia care. And this metric here is about the case finding question. So it's identifying patients, it's recognising and referring on for treatment and intervention. So it's a good metric in terms of are we finding people that we need to provide different assessments and care to. And I wouldn't be too focused on the number. It's about what do we do when we identify people. I think there's a big piece here we touched on at board last month about how do we work with that, again, with our system partners. Patients that come in, not many have a new diagnosis with us, some do. Many of these people are already living with dementia, and how do we support people to perhaps stay out of hospital? How do we access all the other many services and join up lots of sort of siloed services around dementia? So I suppose the reason for having this as a metric is it's something that we've identified this we want to focus on, we want to do better at, and we want to continue to drive forward. So it's one of those we've been able to add to this year's IPR by choice. David, MSR, and then we'll
I'll pick up. So first one, I'll pick up VT that you can see from the report that the data isn't included. I've reported that previously to you. Now that we're pulling that off our EPMA program, we've this month we've got a glitch with that reporting activity, which is why it's not in. I've got no reason to anticipate it's any different than the standards as previously, but I'll bring that back through quality committees and update for that. HSMR board will note that the HSMR remains off track as expected, recognising this is a 12-month rolling position. The in-month HSMR is 117.5. There's a work plan associated with this, which is undergoes significant scrutiny by the quality committee. What I would say to board is that our raw mortality data, the all diagnosis data, shows a very slight upward trend in common with the national picture, but does not reflect the graphs that are shown on the HSMR trajectory. What I would say to board is that my frustration with the longevity of this elevation of HSMR exceeds theirs. I continue to have no concerns around the quality of care of our patients. I continue to have no evidence of a triangulation of a picture of patient quality issues. What we do have is we have a mechanism that is elevated. We understand why that is elevated, and we've put a programme of work in place. But my frustration is that we've made limited inroads into this, I think. Now, that may be entirely reasonable and understandable and acceptable, but I do find that particularly frustrating, and I'm sure board does as well. So what I would say to board is that the initial focus of that work plan has been about concentrating on recognising, learning and influencing the HSMR impact from the bottom up, from the mortality specialties and that level, to try and influence and impact. What I've now added to this is more of a top-down focus, engaging our divisional leadership teams to add grip and focus, and more importantly to facilitate action to change. Because I think we've had conversations and learning. What I'm slightly frustrated about is the actions. Having said that, it's quite clear that our divisions have probably less understanding of the HSMR or the SHIMI position than many of those around this table, and consequently we've got a programme of work to help them understand that and to educate, to facilitate them with the divisional data. Running alongside this, I have a desire to develop our local data intelligence. We have discussed this before. At the moment, what happens is our data goes externally. In effect, it's crunched and then a report comes back telling me that there's a problem. So I can see that from the data, but it doesn't really tell me where there is a problem, where there's a solution or any real-time relevance. And having that timely impact and understanding that and being able to interrogate the data proactively as opposed to relying so much on the historical events, I think will significantly help and allow me to provide better assurance to the board. But this resource, this data analytics resource, will come as a cost, and at the moment we haven't identified any funding stream to facilitate this. I think the other aspect I'd mention to board is that there is recognised a variance in some of our divisional governance processes, and so I've engaged an external review to help improve the consistency and the approach of that. And some of that goes back to that aspect about we've had lots of discussions about learning but very little change. So it's harmonising that, it's the impact of change, and it's ensuring that there's a less of a siloed approach, more of a joined up approach. At the same time, I think we need to work with our external provider of our mortality data, recognising the aspects that we've had with a bit of a revolving door of the consultancy there, and they have now agreed to provide board workshop to help the NEDs have a greater insight into the complexity and the influence of HSMR and SHIMI. I think some of that is relatively easy. I think there's some harder things that we need to get into. I think there's probably something that's influencing our data around how our front door and our initial patient flow occurs, and that's really the acute medicine and the specialty interface, the coding and the function of our emergency department. And there is certainly some evidence that the way that we've got all of those patient flows set up is influencing on the data that we're producing. And having done a bit of a trawl of other organisations that run a front door system similar to ours, they're all seeing a very similar elevation of their HSMR. And so unpicking some of that and working that through is a much longer piece of work and a much harder piece of work. So I have significant frustration that we haven't seen any improvement in this. The raw mortality data shows limited rise in terms of what is happening across all of our diagnosis groups. We understand the cause for our data showing this variation. I think the frustration is around our ability to influence and change that, and hopefully put some stronger actions in place to drive that forward.
Thank you. Barbara.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, HSMR is a regular on the work programme for the Quality Committee, but I wonder whether it's timely now for us to have a workshop specifically to look at mortality metrics and what's going on, both to reappraise the current arrangement or, you know, understanding around the data flows and what might be driving it, but perhaps to put more emphasis this time on the actions and perhaps to include relevant divisional colleagues in that discussion, because it's tended to be people like Nigel, very knowledgeable and helpful, but putting as much emphasis on so what does the data tell us we need to now do instead? And with the support of the board, we could try and get that sorted for, if not the September policy committee soon after.
Support that very much. I think there are 3 people in this organisation who regularly look at HSMR and SHIMI data. Oh, I didn't mention SHIMI. I was going to say that I put it on the slide. Clearly, the SHIMI data is now showing an increase in trajectory, and I think that goes along with everything that you said in terms of that, and that's added into that work stream. But yes, I think there are 3 people in this organisation who regularly look at our mortality data. It's cutting that mortality data and putting it into usable function is not without its challenges, but it's become apparent that the divisional teams have no oversight of which specialties are showing or outlying on the HSMR, and that's data that we need to facilitate them with so that they've got that focus.
On the C. diff, Phil, what's our broad spectrum antibiotic usage like benchmarked against other organisations? So is that a problem for us? And where do we benchmark as an ICS? I think there's been some benchmarking recently across 2 ICS. In other words, how much of a problem do we have outside of the trust with C?
Probably 2 things I need to tell at the top of my head, Andy. It's probably something worth taking back into next quality committee. Yeah, in terms of antibiotic use, we're not an outlier, but in terms of numbers and figures, I'd rather give you that accurately. I think everybody's been using far more antibiotics for quite a number of years, particularly since COVID. Down whether that's changed practice and things, I don't know, but certainly that is a factor in terms of where we are as a system. Perhaps something I need to do a bit of deeper dive into, Andy, and give you that information assurance through committee.
And then just one for Dave. So if comorbidity coding is one of the drivers, what else does that impact in the trust? So notwithstanding, I think we're getting a false signal on mortality. What other signals might that data impact?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So what we're seeing is an increase in divergence. So we're seeing that our expected mortality in HSMR is going down. Now, as I mentioned before, unless we are, as an organisation, ahead of everyone else in the country, and our health inequalities and prevention agenda is functioning fantastically, but we'd be surprised to see that our expected mortality is reducing, and that must come into our capture of our comorbidities in terms of that. What other data does it know? I might just ask you to help me with any that you're thinking it might do, because I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Well, I guess if we're thinking about health inequalities and population health, if we're not recording comorbidities, it will impact on our visibility of some of that. It may impact on finance in some areas. I think we need to think about some of the wider ramifications of this, which we're also thinking about mortality.
Okay.
Maybe something.
No other comments on?
Well, just maybe something that we need to think about as part of that workshop, broaden the scope of it somewhat.
So yes, I mean, the HES data, which supplies our HMR, goes into, and we talk about it in terms of a meat grinder, and it supplies all sorts of different national data. Some of it's around research, some of it used to be around the payment by results and all of those aspects. Now, the majority of that's gone now with top contracts. But there is something around the benchmarking of our overall cost that we've been linked into that, I think, that will then set us apart if we're showing that we've got less ill patients than we really have. And that the model hospital data will then start to skew us, I would think.
Yeah.
And if we're planning to have a workshop, I think it'd be wise to have someone there from NHS England just to show this, we're completely transparent. But also someone from the ICS who should be looking at this across the ICS. I think that'd be really useful to include them.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
You want to move on?
Yeah, thank you. So we'll move on to Rob, who'll take us through the people.
Thank you, Paul. Excuse me. Good morning, board. Colleagues joining us virtually or in the room today. So, thought I'd just set the scene a little bit. So, as we've moved into this new mechanism of reporting, we've increased the number of indicators that we report on. We've increased that now to 12, 11 which are reportable for this quarter. Noting we've got one there on the flu update that doesn't come online till slightly later in the year, of which 6 of the indicators have been achieved and 5 haven't. Want to focus to start off with on some of the areas that are below where they should be. Certainly we have seen a fair bit of investment to our establishment over the start of the year, whether that's the targeted investment fund into Newark Hospital, whether that's the development of a community diagnostic centre, investment within our emergency department, again another example, or the general churn each year where we do establishment reviews across our ward-based areas. What that has resulted in is a slight uptick in our vacancy position. What I can share is the amount of individuals we have in post today is greater than the amount of individuals we had in post at the start of April. So again, another upturn there. The People Committee had some, I would describe it as positive action around the actions myself, teams I lead, and colleagues that attended committee around the steps in place, and certainly anticipate we will see improvement if we move into month 4. We've seen some notable appointments into some of our inpatient areas, whether that be Mansfield Community Hospital, Newark, etc. The second area is employee relations. So we've seen a slight uptick across the quarter. I think some of this builds on grievances and conduct that we've had come into the department. I think it's also fair to say some of these have been quite complex, that require time, against the backdrop of sometimes trade union representative availability. However, I've talked through here and through People Committee the importance of our care values. We plan to reset some of those, along with linking with the new leadership development offer, that both of which will start to come online across QT. I then want to move on to some of the agency information. So for the first time, we've got a bit more detail, a bit more depth in regards to some key metrics. These are metrics that are reported at a system and at regional level. I think it's fair to say some of the performance against these metrics have fluctuated across the quarter. whether that's down to acuity that we've faced across the hospital or as a result of our recovery against the impact of industrial action. However, very proud to say, for the first time since June 2020, we've had a reportable position of no off-framework agency. As you can see, we came very close within the months of April and May, but some positive snippets there. And I think a key mechanism of some of this is the conversations we've had with 360 Assurance around, we received some significant assurance around our robust controls in place for the engagement of agency workers, and under the improvement faculty work around how we can transform some programmes associated with medical, nursing, AHP workforce to mitigate the dependency on agency. And finally, before I ask for any questions or invite any questions, should I say, I think it's also worth noting some of the sustained improvements that's been made. I talked about indicators such as appraisals and mandatory training not needing to be where they needed to be. You know, if we look at the back end of last year, in a much healthier position now, and we've seen some sustained improvement on that. And against the backdrop of challenge, some sustained improvement around the wellbeing position. So I'll pause there, Claire, and happily open up for any questions.
Thank you. Well, can I just ask about the lag on the timescale for recruitment? Because this is something that we've discussed in the past, and I'm sure certainly when I was on People Committee as a member, it was an issue, and I'm not seeing a significant reduction in that timescale. So what's the action plans to help us to ensure that people don't go off somewhere else?
Yeah,
in that time.
So I'll probably take two themes, Claire, just to describe that. So some of it is choice. Some individuals wish to choose normally when their university kind of graduation is finished, almost potentially have a summer off and start around the September time, which inevitably during that period we keep people warm. And there's a variety of different mechanisms we do that, whether that's a thank you card, whether it's some acknowledgement of bringing people together before they start and start them in cohorts. And the second bit is also recognising that any recruitment process, individuals have notice periods, and sometimes those notice periods fluctuate from a week up to 3 months. And again, we encourage leaders and some of the teams I lead to ensure that there's proactive, positive messages in advance of them starting is received. So we do as much as we can, and I think it's also worth recognising we regularly review that just to make sure those approaches working. A big component of that is the ID appointment. When individuals actually come in on site, we try and make that as welcoming as possible for them.
So I mean, a lot of those factors are obviously external to which we don't actually have control and probably significantly less influence. So it's more about what else continue to review what we are in control of, what we think we can do to shorten that process.
One of the challenges we used to have was the frequency of orientation. So we've increased that now. We also increased the capacity, and we've been able to do that because we're not under some of the COVID restrictions that we used to be. Face to face, self and fall open that, which is every other Monday.
Great, thank you, Ali.
So one way to look at vacancy is worry about it, and the other way is, given the financial constraints that the organisation has, and it's not the only one in the NHS, to look at it as an opportunity. Has there been an exercise undertaken on those vacancies that do exist to say that they're absolutely necessary to fill? And if that's the case, have consistent criteria been applied to that exercise?
So certainly perhaps welcome reflections maybe from Rich on some of that. So we have established mechanisms for the approval of a vacancy, which is underpinned by the track system, which you might be familiar with, Ali, that all leads to each vacancy require an executive sign-off. And I think the wider piece of work of reviewing long-term vacancy, it's an area that I'm keen to perhaps explore in a bit more detail through People Committee, and we can provide some agenda time in September to do so. If there's anything you might want to add to that.
Yeah, happy to come in on that. It's a good question, Ali.
Yeah.
It's something that, as part of our financial governance framework, we're looking at making sure that we have got the right kind of scrutiny around that and the right challenge around it. It is a bit of a mixed bag. Clearly, in some areas, such as our nursing, we've got establishments, so vacancies relate to establishments recruit to that, and they're based on safe staffing metrics and identify best practice. Similarly with medical, when we've got job plans in place, some of the corporate areas in particular we're really keen to make sure that we've got the right level of oversight and probably peer review around them, particularly where there might be roles where we might be able to work closely with partners, think about doing things in a different way. So vacancy control panels are one of the areas that we're just looking at as part of our financial governance to ensure we get that.
Ranjit.
Yes, I was going to say, one is whether the vacancy is relevant, or the second is sometimes using the vacancy in terms of analysing the task and reconfiguring what's needed. And we saw a good example and assurance with the pharmacy. Part of the success of the pharmacy was looking at some of those vacancies and reconfiguring those, rather than just carrying on with hard to fill. And so again, as you say, some assurance on the consistency of how are we looking at the other vacancies, and some of that transferable learning for how pharmacy have applied it would be helpful at next People Committee, I think.
So just adding, I know your comments as well before about the NHS workforce plan. I think part 3 of that was reform. That you were saying you're reviewing currently our existing people and culture plan against that one.
Yeah.
So maybe that's an area of
I think
increasing focus.
I think that's probably the area that we've probably given a bit more focus to in regards to that review of the current strategy.
Yeah.
And what, particularly what kind of outcome and impact metrics that we can describe from them.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Reggie.
Sorry, I had my own. So mine was really around the agency use. I think what would be valuable, I don't know whether you've got some facts and figures now, Rob, or People Committee is, I know we're saying due to some of the growth, the industrial action and so on, what would be valuable is to see if we remove the growth and the industrial action agency use, and also the escalation of beds where we haven't got a staff establishments, hence we're using agent staff. I think it would be good to see the breakdown of the agency usage. And if we take those 3 areas out, what's our percentage agent? Not just what is our percentage agency use when we take those 3 areas out, but also to see the costs and the percentages for each of those 3 areas as well.
Yeah, I think that could be a useful exercise, Manjeet. And clearly we might want some visibility of that through Finance Committee as well.
Yeah, it links to
Really useful for the Finance Committee. I think it'd be really useful.
It's a bit of collaborative work.
Information, and particularly when you then think about an agency cost as being pretty much double what it would be for a substantive understanding of the impact.
And then sorry, unless you want to come back, because my other question's different.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with others around that. I think we've improved our agency reporting, and there's certainly a lot more visibility around the organisation on what we're spending. But predominantly we do it on areas of agency spend rather than the root cause of it. And I think some further work and visibility around the drivers of it and the root cause analysis would be useful.
Yeah, I think with some of the soft today, a lot of the areas are very much about how do we get granular at the committee in terms of breaking those down into sub-metrics and so that you may already be looking at, but for us. But my second one was about exit interviews, and it was raised at the governor's meeting on Monday as well. And what would be useful is to understand how consistently are they being applied and what's the learning? So the quality criteria, but the effectiveness of them. You know how we talk about appraisals, that there's the quantity, are we doing enough appraisals, but also looking at the quality of the appraisals. So what would success look like for a good exit interview? And I know you've got a different name for it, I can't remember. What would success look like and how consistently is that being applied, and maybe relating it to our cultural heat map in terms of areas for improvement?
And I think building on that, Manjeet, is it's a key piece of information, you
Yeah.
know, of how we listen to individuals that may have itchy feet, and we've described talking with Tom as an opportunity to glean more information about that, but also individuals that have left the organisation or in the latter stages of departure. What can we do to maybe improve experience or prevent them, you know, leaving Sherwood, leaving the trust?
Yeah, because what's the positive word you have for it? Not exit interview. You have a nice positive word for it.
So itchy feet conversation.
Itchy feet conversation before they leave. Yeah. Okay.
Bill.
That's just what I was going to say. It's about getting them before the
Yeah,
exit interview.
yeah.
We've just reintroduced a internal transfer scheme.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons
Oh.
people were leaving was because they wanted a different experience or a different speciality. We can't always give them all of that here. There is some stuff we can do, and if
Yeah.
we've got vacancies where we have, how do we make that process far easier?
Yeah.
Why put you through a whole process and a 10-page application form to move from one ward to the next? We'll probably move you to every other week anyway to cover the gap.
Yeah.
So it's about having that conversation. How do we, in a controlled way, do that internal transfer? Because not everyone can move from that
Yeah.
ward. Keep it safe, but that's been really beneficial and well received.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So timely care domain, Rachel.
Thank you. So just to remind board, this is the first time that we've seen the new suite of metrics that we signed off aboard a few months ago. There are a lot of timely care, partly because the operating framework this year is very focused on access, obviously because of the COVID backlogs and urgent care. And you can't get away from the fact that a lot of these metrics are in the red. I think that the thing I'd like to say as context, and I'll talk this through as I go through the narrative, is that although we are not meeting the planning guidance or national standards on many of these metrics, I think that is the case across the wider NHS, and actually what we are doing is benchmarking very well versus our peers, whether that be within our system, within our region, or even in many cases nationally. And what I might try to do in future reports is perhaps draw some of that out a little bit more in some of the charts that we can share to show you where we sit versus others, because I think it is important to understand that relativity in the context of what are some challenges that the whole NHS is facing. So if I take in order, then if I start with the emergency pathway, so again, we benchmark well on a number of these indicators. So ambulance handovers, we're usually first or second in the region on this, 95% within 30 minutes, hardly any over 16 minutes. We don't meet the 15-minute standard, you know, all of the time, probably just less than 50%. But we're not running much beyond that because this is something we track on a daily basis through our bed meetings. Our 4-hour performance, 74 versus a national planning guidance of 76, which again is not the national standard 95, but this is where the NHS has been asked to get to by the end of this financial year. We're really not far off that at the moment, and we do sometimes exceed it. And we're just going back to the earlier conversation about our RESTEC performance, 37.5% against 33. So we do perform very well on that. And that's in the context of, at the moment, our RESTEC pathways are purely focused within medicine. So we do have a plan to expand to surgery once we've completed these building works, probably around Christmas, New Year time, which will give us further benefit in this arena, which I think is really good from a patient experience point of view. It's important to point out, I think, going back to the earlier conversation, that actually our quality of care metrics around urgent care remain good. So although we're not meeting the national access standards, we can evidence the fact that we're still providing good outcomes and you know, a lower level of harm for these patients. And more recently, the national CQC service survey on patient experience in emergency departments has been published, and we've come out in the top decile there. So again, although patients are experiencing longer waits than we would like, the experience they're getting in the department is actually perceived as being very positive. There's some learning for us there in terms of how we share waiting time data with patients. So we're going to take that on board and think how we can make it more explicit for patients while they're waiting, how long the wait might be, but overall a very positive outcome. I do have some concerns about the number of patients who are breaching 12 hours. And we're having a renewed focus on this operationally, both through our bed meetings in terms of escalation processes through to myself. I think some of this is in part because we are consciously keeping patients in ED longer because we know that we can get them home rather than admit them and then potentially increase their length of stay. And that was very much in line with the planned implementation of the new waiting time standards, which have now been stood down. So we just need to review that to make sure we're not sort of hitting the target but missing the point by admitting more patients than we needed just to get them out within that 4 hours. So that's a piece of work in place at the moment. And our bed occupancy remains very high, even though effectively Q1 we're sort of coming into the summer period. You can see from the report we're still at sort of 96-ish% against a 92% standard, and actually the accepted optimal level is more like 85%. So that is still a struggle for us, and we'll explain why we're still having many days in Opal 4 throughout Q1 and indeed into Q2, although not at the levels we were seeing over Q3 and winter last year. That is in large part driven by the high numbers of medically safe, which you can see are still over the plan that we've agreed with the system, which is a stretch target for this year, to try and reduce those medically safe patients as part of the route to balance plan. We're working very closely with system partners. There's been an escalated level of meetings that Paul's been involved in over recent months or weeks to really focus in on a system as to what actions we can take to drive some of this. Starting to see some green shoots actually in terms of some of our relationships with partners around discharge, the development of the transfer of care hub just across the corridor here, and I'm working with the ICS discharge team to unblock some issues that have been stuck for a number of years here. So early progress, but I feel quite heartened actually in terms of some of the progress we're making around some of our discharge processes, and particularly around some of our outlying beds at Mansfield and Newark, which is where patients are having rehab and need a real sort of focused support from discharge. A number of things going on to address this. So we've implemented a new fit to sit area in ED, which again is probably keeping people slightly longer, but making sure they can get home directly from ED. That might be slightly depressing our SDEC figures, but we're trying to understand that relationship at the moment. SDEC I've talked about. We've more or less completed the recruitment now on the ED business case that board approved back in the autumn. We're not seeing the full impact of that yet because some of the new medical rotas that will come in place on the back of that don't come into place until later on in August. But that will enable us to have much more senior decision makers on the floor, particularly in the sort of late afternoons and the evenings, which is often where our waits start to bunch up, and then we struggle during the night and come onto longer waits in the morning. So we're really positive about the impact we'll see there. And just in terms of slightly longer horizon thinking forward to next winter, it's probably worth, it's a year since I came into post. We're at a much more advanced stage of winter planning at this point than we were when I arrived last year. So I feel much more confident around the quality of winter plan that we'll have, albeit some of the options around opening additional capacity are going to be more limited to us this year. And we're currently on track to open the new discharge lounge in Ward 3 in the old retained estate in October, which will give us a huge injection of capacity to help us get patients out earlier in the day from our acute beds here at Kingsmill. So I'll move on to the elective pathway. Again, lots of reds here, but I think what is quite positive is that for some of our bigger activity cohorts, we are already exceeding our plan and our stretch plan, so particularly day cases and outpatient first appointments. You can see there we're doing really well on the activity plan. That will be translating into our ERF performance, which I'm sure Rich will cover on in the finance section. A little bit down on the elective side, and I think that's probably driven in part by the industrial action and also by some of the challenges that we've talked about previously in terms of recruitment of anaesthetists, but the numbers are much smaller in that cohort of patients. We've done well on our general long wait trajectories, although we haven't quite achieved the ambition to hit 78 weeks by the end of June. We finished on 6 and we're hovering around that level now, so there's a little bit more push. It's consistently below that, but actually it's still a big achievement to have cleared what was significant backlogs between the 104 level of wait that we hit a while ago and to get down to 78 weeks. We're now working really hard on the trajectory to get down to 65 weeks maximum wait by the end of March. The small numbers that are still breaching are generally very complex pathways or patient choice, and we're still continuing to accept a material level of mutual aid from NUH having a partner in the system to support them, particularly with ENT where they've got some high backlogs there, so that will be slightly impacting on our figures. From an outpatient perspective, we're relatively stable in terms of our remote attendances, and I know that's something that's been challenged here at board before. We are doing a deep dive into that right at specialty level to understand how each specialty is performing and how it benchmarks versus both our sort of local trusts and more nationally to understand where the opportunities might be. I need to be realistic around some of these outpatient metrics, I think, because when we talked earlier about the industrial action and the impact it's having, in terms of prioritising where the teams are spending their time, we probably are much more focused on some of the urgent care delays and those very long waits, as opposed to some of these more patient experience type metrics and outpatients. They are really important. The teams are absolutely working to address them, but if something slips, it's probably these, if I'm honest, which is why you may not be seeing quite the level of improvement that I'd like to see. Again, PIF, I mean, we perform well on this and we benchmark well on this, so there is more opportunity and we're gradually rolling it out across more specialties, but not at the pace potentially we could if we weren't sort of preoccupied with some of the strike activities. And then from a diagnostic point of view, from a DMO1 perspective, we're at around 68%. I just want to highlight that there's a really broad range of improvements in here. So for some of our bigger imaging modalities, for example, MRI, we're running at 97%, which I think in a post-pandemic environment is really, really impressive, and a lot better than some of our peers. Equally, so we have some very challenging services like echoes that are more down at 30%, where we're seeking mutual aid from other providers to support us with some of those backlogs. So we manage this very much at a modality level, and we do have that granularity of understanding for each individual test. And then finally, cancer. This, I think, is an area that generally we benchmark well across most of the targets, albeit we don't hit the target in all cases. Particularly our 2-week wait and our faster diagnosis standard, which means that all patients have to have a diagnosis within 28 days for GP referral. We generally perform well at. We struggle a little bit more with the 31 and 62 day standards, but actually our backlog is better than the trajectory that we've set ourselves for this year, and we benchmark well in the Midlands on this. But it's a challenge for all trusts. We're very much focusing on individual tumour sites that are struggling with some of those recruitment issues and capacity issues that are driving that. But overall, I think our cancer performance is seen as quite a positive story. We've just got more work to do, I think, to get actually on target for some of the tumour sites. There's probably going to be some changes to the cancer standards in coming months to reduce it from a national suite of 10 standards just to 3 core standards. One of which will remain the FDS standard, which is becoming the headline standard, I think, for cancer, which is so hopefully that gives you a broad overview of the positives and the negatives. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Ali.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So I'm really keen to contextualise some of this, which is important, I think, because we're heading into winter. We've got a background of strikes, and it's all very well the hospital trying to do everything it can. It's not all in our hands. So I'd really like you to push the ICS into providing data about primary care services and what they're doing and their contribution is to try and keep people out of hospital. And there's an important strategic link that we've discussed to our organisation in that if those services are not being provided adequately, and I believe that the BMA have indicated that GPs may actually strike, which is going to compound the situation, then we need to have a strategic look at how we can sort of overcome that void in a predictable way. The second thing I'm really keen on is that our difficulty with flow is we've got our own metrics here, but we haven't got metrics for social care. And we need to have those metrics for social care, which would contextualise what we're doing here. So I think if you could work with the ICS to get that kind of background detail, it would help the public and it would help us to understand this data better.
Thank you. Yeah, and totally agree. And Paul and I are on calls probably several times a week at the moment. I've been having many of these conversations.
And just to pick up on that, so I talked quite a lot about the system reset and the business case that was approved by NHS England, and PA Consulting have now been formally appointed as our urgent care partners across the system. That's health and social care. and are currently mobilising, and that's exactly the conversation we had this week around where that focus might be. Primary care was in that, was featured in the conversation, but not on the call, which is telling itself. So you're absolutely right to point that out. Yeah, so that work is mobilising and is picking up. And in terms of preparations for winter, which is one of the contexts that you just mentioned there, we're trying to understand or asking PA to help us to understand where we would get the biggest impact for the shortest, biggest benefit for the shortest period of work, identifying and diagnosing those areas where we can have the biggest impact in preparation for winter. So we focus that partner in that facilitation, that assistance that we're getting into the areas that have the biggest impact in our preparations.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you. So similar to that, a couple of reflections on the report. The first one is a bit different though. So we knew we were going to have an awful lot of metrics around timely care. So it's just a reflection for us as a board, perhaps when we're thinking about bandwidth in subcommittees, that there is sufficient time to be able to perhaps get under the skin of this a bit more, because it's always going to be difficult for us here, because it's an insight into your life, but it's kind of there's a lot there to get our heads around, particularly then building on what Ali said. It'd be really helpful to know, for example, if I was to pick on medically safer transfer, is the standard of 40 what we're actually aiming to get to, and by when, and what are the chunks that are going to get us there? And what Ali usefully kind of really explained there was kind of what's within our control in doing that, and how we're going to hit it. What are we expecting from our partners? But also being clear ourselves, having can we do all this by better process? Can we do it by transformation? Or actually we're going to have to look quite hard at, do we need some other answer? Is one extra discharge unit on ward 3, wherever, is that going to do it? So it'd be really good to have that transparency. And then I must say what Ali said was probably better than what I was asking. Being really clear on what part is ours and what part is the ICS to deliver.
And we do have a trajectory that takes us down in step changes to that 40. It does go in steps, because what effectively we need to be able to do is get to the point of being able to close wards behind that, because some of that is driven by the financial position. It's just about improving flow, it's about taking some of those costs out. We've talked here before about the level of escalation beds that we have open that are currently not properly funded in the plan. So I think it's coming at it from both angles.
I think it's kind of what I was getting at, if you don't mind me carrying on, Claire. Yeah. I'll try to be quick. So it's partly so that we have assurance and can all believe in that plan, as opposed to we're being put under pressure to try and say we'll do something that we don't really know that we can, because we've signed up to closing some of those beds and been explicit as a board that having made that decision jointly, it's still the right decision, and do we need to challenge that?
So the plan that we've signed up to is a plan that gets us to the balanced position we need to be in by year end. What we don't have is the full detail behind how we'll deliver that as a system, but we've signed up to it as a system. So it isn't a Sherwood plan or an ICB plan. It's a system plan. To some degree, I think when we signed up to it, it was aspirational. We knew that we then needed to work out how we were going to do this. I think you're right. It is the things that we are reliant on the system to deliver in terms of increased capacity in the community, for example. There are things that are within our gift to deliver, probably more around the flow side of being able to discharge people earlier in the day. So in the sort of new group that's been set up at an exec level to review some of this, just last week, for example, we had a deep dive into what we call the P0 patients. So those are the patients that are used to simple discharges. So the paradigm being that we should just be able to get them out quicker. So we've had a real deep dive across both ourselves and NUH with the system on that to understand where the opportunities might be. I still believe the big opportunities are around getting people out quicker, because that's where we can see the delays. Our simple discharges might be delayed by a few hours, and that is absolutely something that we've got to focus on through our internal flow improvement. But the patients who are delayed medically safe on a supported pathway may be delayed by days, in some cases a lot longer. And so that's where the real cumulative effect will be of trying to bring these beds down. So it's, yeah, sorry.
No, you're right. I think what you're touching on there, Steve, is probably one of the things that keeps me awake at night, and one of the conundrums we're in at the moment, really. So in Q1, we've spent about 3.3 million on escalation capacity, as we call it. Although a lot of that capacity has been in place for 12 to 18 months probably now. And we're in that difficult balance of, at the moment, a lot of that is modelled on a variable pay model, and it's probably not the most optimal model for those beds to be running that. But we've got an ambition to try and improve the metrics and improve the patient flow, as you've just kind of touched on and Rachel has explained, which hopefully enables us to pull out of that. And you've got the tricky balance of actually do you want to substantially staff that, and how do you manage that? So I think a bit of greater visibility around that, around those metrics, and looking at that as a system, something we really need to get to. The CFO of our ICB in Nottinghamshire is leading a group to try and improve some of that visibility around this metric.
The other thing I'd just say is that although the plan is to, by reducing medically safety, for us to then close beds behind that to improve the financial position, we won't close those beds until we have confidence around that, seeing that reduction in the first place, but also knowing that it's going to be sustained through and beyond winter, which I don't think we have yet. So I think it goes back to Dave's point really around the sort of tension between some of these operational standards and financial ambitions versus the quality metrics. And I could easily put more pressure into the organisation over summer and say, well, let's just close those wards because we know this is probably the best it's going to be. But then we'll propose overcrowding in ED and long waits and harm. And so we're just constantly balancing these things out.
Okay, thank you.
Quite a few. So Barbara and then Manjeet.
No,
I will come to you, Dave.
Well, it was just on.
Oh, it's on this.
It's just on that point. So there is absolutely no doubt that the plan to ensure that patients who are remaining in our beds whose cares could be provided elsewhere, to move them to the alternative provision of that care is exactly the right thing for those patients. And we can cite for falls and all of those aspects. So there's no doubt about that. There's also no doubt that the ambitious trajectory that we agreed as a system to move those patients for Sherwood, let alone for any of our partners, is off track at the moment. I think the difficulty that we've got, there is a series of newish meetings going in to try and unpick some of this. I think we're absolutely clear, and we have good data now, that our patients that we're able to discharge quickly, our pathway zero patients, go quickly. That's not an issue. So it's those patients who remain in our organisation who we need help to discharge is the problem. I think going back to Ali's point, I think we still have a need for greater clarity on where those blockers are, how they're being unblocked, and what support we need to do, but also others need to do to get to that point, which then leads into Rich's point about our financial situation and the impact it's having on us.
Thank you.
Rachel's covered the issue I was wanting.
Yes, I've got a few things. But firstly, I know at Finance Committee, we asked for some scenarios that if we're using escalation beds now, come the height of winter, what could it look like if we were doing nothing? So it would be useful to see that, but also with some of the mitigations in place, such as the discharge lounge and things like that, what it could potentially look like. So I think what we're asking for now is to consider what December, January could look like in terms of some forward-thinking trajectories rather than looking backwards. And the other thing, it's really helpful to see some of the quantitative benchmarking where we are on things compared to others. I think in terms of the challenges and so on we face, I think I'd like to see far more visibility on the qualitative benchmarking, particularly in terms of where are people doing it well and what's our learning from it. So, for example, Luton and Bedford Hospital and Milton Keynes Hospital in the same ICB, and they got visibility on the differences in their medically fit for discharge. One was really good on that preventing readmission and that partnership with the primary care services in the community. The other was better at the discharges, but then it prompted them to learn from each other, which without that visibility, they wouldn't have done so. And I just wonder how we're getting some of that qualitative learning on who are the best in the country in different parts and how are we learning. And I know, you know, places like the LGA, certainly the improvement advisors can advise on which local authorities have really cracked it with the primary care services and or have innovated in areas, which brings me on to the discharge hub. I'd like to understand a little bit more about how are the different partners, you know, the integrated approach, because I don't think it's simply about what can we do and what can we the ICS do. We are the ICS. So, you know, the role of the 3 districts, where are they on the housing and the disability disabled facilities grant? How well is the disabled facilities grant being integrated with the NHS version of the equipment grant? Because sometimes they can work in silos and that integration can really drive some of the waiting times and the adaptation. Where are they with the use of the voluntary sector and so on? And what are some of the key metrics there and social care? So looking at some of that partnership metrics framework, you know, but I'm happy to discuss some of that later on, because I've done some of that work in my local authority life in the past, and it's been amazing how much getting far more integration in that area and reducing the traditional functional silos has really helped to drive some of this. So, okay.
And I think I probably can't answer all of that here,
yeah.
but I think the relationships with social care are improving.
Yeah.
The PA work that Paul has described, so we're managing that across all the 6 providers, which includes the 2 local authorities, and the ADASs work very closely with me and my COO counterparts across the sort of the other piece and Notts Healthcare, for example. So I think we are getting a greater understanding of some of these things, and to be fair, some of those metrics across the system I probably do have greater visibility because they're just not coming through as board. Yeah. I think the national team published the sort of national letter around winter planning for this year, came out on Friday, I think, and they describe a 10-point plan there. Some of the enabling work they're doing around that is having a whole load of collaborative work across the country actually that we can participate in, which will be about some of that best practice sharing. So there seems to be a very supportive approach this year to trying to get people working in a more collaborative way on areas of good practice and so on. Again, we might be one of those actually in some of areas like STEP, where we perform very strongly, and ambulance handover, for example. So I think there are some positive things going on, but it's probably a conversation to take outside because there's a lot of detail.
Just one follow-up on this. I know the national stuff I like to see through the media, so it can be very much about key headlines that make sense. But how much is the virtual wards going to help us out here, and how are we on target for the number given? You know, just honestly.
So part of our plan includes a trajectory on virtual wards in terms of beds freed up, which I am nervous about, if I'm honest, because I don't think we're managing to get to that level. Some of the trajectories in terms of patients being identified, I think you were saying we were over trajectory on. Dave's the SRO for virtual wards, so I might defer to him on some of the detail. I think it's evolving in knots. I don't think we're where we need to be yet, but I mean, we've not long ago instituted a frailty pathway, have we? We started to see some early signs of success on, but I think it's early days.
Yeah, so I think we had a meeting last week, I think, across the ICB to pick up some of this, and there's a follow-up meeting which is arranged for tomorrow to specifically look at virtual wards, because there is clearly a national focus on that. In terms of our business case for what we were funded for in virtual wards, we had 2 components. We had one was around our OPAT service, and then the second one was around respiratory patients, primarily about weaning patients off oxygen in a virtual ward. We've had quite a lot of hiccups along that sort of way. Some of the hiccups have been that NHSE have changed the goal lines of what might constitute a virtual ward, and then told us that the OPAT patients couldn't be in, but actually have now agreed that they can be in. in our catchment number. I think there's some discrepancies across the system about double counting and who's declaring which virtual wards sit which organisation, and we've had huge issues around governance and technology and those aspects, in effect ensuring that it's safe, and that's what's been taking work out. We have, the last time I looked, we have 20 patients sitting on a virtual ward, in effect, for Sherwood. In terms of our OPAC patients, that is over trajectory, so more than we were commissioned to do. In terms of the respiratory patients, it's under trajectory, but that is the pathway that will kick off as we start to go into winter, because summer is not the time that you have a massive amount of respiratory patients who you wean off oxygen. So that's no surprise there. And as Rachel describes, there's a whole host of other pathways that we're trying to work up to improve and push this forward. It has taken us a while, I think, without doubt, and that's not just us, that's across the partners, if you like, the system. I think it's also taken us a while. We have not put any medical resource yet into virtual ward, so in fact what I'm describing is an additional ask. We do have a job plan with some virtual ward medical time now ready to go, but we haven't actually recruited to it. So there's a whole host of reasons, but I don't think there's any lack of desire to push this. I don't think there's any doubt that it will increase as we get towards winter. I think Ali's point that he alluded to earlier, which is about, is this truly new resource or a new service, or is this a re-provision of a service that was historically done by someone else and has fallen by the wayside, is a separate discussion and an interesting discussion. Our data suggests that we've saved around 500 bed days to date with virtual ward. That's a bit out of date. That's a month or so ago, but so it's had a material impact, but it's not the saviour, if that makes sense.
But it has, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you if you've got yours.
I just wondered if it was worth, on some of the earlier discussions, doing a deep dive in the finance committee so we can draw out the detail.
Mm.
A good suggestion.
I think that's something you want to look
On
at.
the long-term length of stay and medical discharge in terms of financial implications.
Okay. That's something maybe the committee can consider.
Mm.
I am conscious of time, so let's press on.
Yeah, Rich, to take us through the best value care done.
Yeah, thank you. So after seeing all the nice colourful bits of the report, for some reason my section is nice and grey. That's a reflection on me, or I'll try and add a bit of colour to it, although it might be red.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. We can see the red.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a reflection of the conversations that we've been having. We know quarter one's been incredibly challenging in many ways, and it's no different in the financial position. What I would say is, although this is the first quarter report to the board, our finance committee do meet on a monthly basis, just in recognition of the financial challenge that we're facing. So we've had 3 months of looking at this. The first month really was looking at the plan and how we closed the gap in the planning, and then we've quite quickly moved on to understanding where we are and what's actually happening. As Manjeet mentioned earlier, we're looking to move then into the forecasts and the scenarios and really getting a bit of a handle about what we might be able to do, and importantly what we might be able to influence to help to improve our financial position. The position as it is a 4.9 million deficit, which is 1 million adverse to our financial plan. As we've already talked about, the additional capacity remains the largest element of that. We've spent 3.3 million year to date on escalation capacity and some of the continuation of schemes that were set up through winter that we're looking to close down now. We've also seen the impact of the industrial action, as I described earlier. I think the other key elements of the plan really are around our financial improvement programme. So in terms of what we're reporting, it is slightly ahead of plan. That is largely due to some non-recurrent underspends in certain areas, particularly around vacancies in corporate areas, for example. And it's also important to note that the financial improvement programme trajectory, or the planned phasing, is heavily backweighted from quarter two onwards. So that challenge just get more difficult. It's really important that we start to identify and deliver on some recurrent savings around that area. The other areas that I'd probably point to are agency. We've talked a little bit about that. We've seen some good improvements, as Rob described earlier, in terms of our compliance with frameworks, and we're continuing to see on a quarterly basis that we're reducing the number of hours that we're exceeding our price cap. We are still above the ambition of 3.7% agency bill as total pay, and that is a challenge that we're looking to overcome through some of our transformation groups. The final bit that I talk about, which is a driver of the financial position, is the elective recovery fund. So as Rachel described, we are seeing some positive performance in terms of our elective, despite the industrial action and the impact that that's had on our ability to deliver. I think to the end of Q1, we've delivered about 23% of our full year elective target, which is relatively good. If you do a forward trajectory just based on working days, we'd get up to around about 95% of the plan. On top of that, we need to overlay some of the productivity programs that we've got in place, the opening of our newer collective hub, and some other schemes that we've looked to invest in to really help to enhance our elective performance. So it feels like there's potentially some green shoots around that if I'm looking for areas to be optimistic. The final thing I'll just touch on is the governance. We've really focused on our financial governance over the first quarter. We've talked before about divisional governance and some consistency across the divisions. Divisions are now introducing finance committees within their own divisions to review some of these areas, which helps to give us a bit of oversight, particularly around the vacancies, as we talked about earlier. We've also in the last week or two shared budget holder guidance as well, just to reiterate the responsibilities of budget holders and help them to understand how the finance team can help them as well. And the final thing around that is our forecast outturn. So you'll be aware that through the last financial year we were subject to a forecast outturn change protocol, which was set out by NHS England, and it set out the steps we'd need to go through as an organisation before we changed our forecast. We're looking at how we implement that at a divisional level to make sure that we're really clear on the elements that are within our control and that we can influence, but also equally understand those where we might need support from our ICB or NHS England partners. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Andrew.
The RAF target's been reduced by 2%. Is that going to limit material?
Yeah, so the point Andrew refers to there is NHS England are looking at, they're clearly conscious of the financial impact of the industrial action that took place over Q1, and are looking at how they can support NHS organisations around that. The initial guidance changes that the elective recovery target will reduce, and some of the money which would have been variable income will now be fixed income for the organisation. So that will help us to offset some of those costs that we've experienced. Clearly, we still want to target to deliver as much elective activity as we can do to help us with some of our waiting list issues. The exact details of that guidance haven't yet been shared, so we'll explore that more at the next finance committee.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that's been a particularly good and robust consideration of our IPR, which is why I've allowed it to expand way beyond what we were scheduled for, because I think particularly setting that discussion in the context of this being a new way in which this performance is reported. So thank you very much for that. We're going to move on now. Board assurance framework. Paul.
Okay, try and make some time on. Thank you. Board assurance framework for review and approval of the proposed changes agreed by respectively subcommittees, specifically increasing the risk score, principal risk 1 agreed by the quality committee, and I think there was also subsequently to the report being compiled, also a suggested change to given the people and culture committee. Also to consider the implication that 2 of our, maybe even 3 now, but 2 of our principal risks, that's 1 and 4, horrible risk levels, and also to consider any changes and approve the final document.
So board are asked to consider that, to consider whether or not they're happy to agree these changes. Okay, and approve the BAF.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Use of the trust seal.
Yes, Chair, this is just a short report, just for noting. You'll see that the first seal referred to is referenced by Rachel in terms of it into the conversion of 3. So that is just please for noting, please.
Okay, happy to note. Thank you very much. And back to you again, Sally, for the well-led review recommendations.
Yes, indeed. So just to clarify here that this paper and the table at the reverse end of it, the only updates made to that table are those that I have transposed from the minutes of the meeting that took place in February when it was last considered. So what the board is now being asked to look at are the updates to recommendations 13 and 15, noting those progress updates and anticipating how close we may be to closing those off, but not recommending that they are closed off today.
Okay, and I think that sits with where we are on, particularly around continuous improvement, ensuring that.
Indeed, and the intention would be that a further report would come back in 6 months' time, which time hopefully we will have progressed.
And that will be within our time period of the well-led review, that it was 6 months would still be reasonable.
That's the report agreed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just on the process, sorry, you might have just said it, but so yes, very happy with that. At what stage will we double check that we're not slipping back on anything else? Is that something we might need to build in at some point, or do we have another review? And
yes, good point. As Sally mentioned, we are reviewing the progress on those that we previously were haven't signed off. I think at the next 6 months review, Sally, I think what we can do is provide assurance that we review the entirety of recommendations.
Thank you.
Yes, I just had an idea. We did some good work on the maturity workshops and the assurance work for individual committees on better governance. We've had the well-read review. I just wondered whether along those lines, and how helpful it's been, is whether there could be something about maturity, about how the committees sort of work across each other, because there's a lot of overlap, whether it's improvement we discussed is, as much finance, people and quality, or other areas. So I just wanted to explore that sort of thought further outside of this board, building on, how it helps us.
Yeah.
I picked up that as well, because 360 Assurance are looking to provide a kind of update on a maturity matrix work on each of the committees. But I think that's a really good good point and additional one to raise with them, and to thinking how we might want to put that in.
Yeah, much as I say, much more of.
It's about that triangulation.
Yeah. And also the ICB, the system related work, because we're getting better at the committee bit. So it's the wider agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Assurance and subcommittees, audit insurance, Graham.
If I might jump ahead and get to it. Not too much heritage report this time, pleased to know. The first bit is around clinical audit. We subjected the clinical audit team to rather a tortuous day, in the sense that they were at audit committee in the morning and quality in the afternoon. Audit committee is very much around looking at the process and how it's working. Quality will pick up on the outputs from it. I think the bits I wanted to highlight from that were, first of all, it's really good news that they've got the team up to full strength and working through. But then I think now there's 2 extra bits to think about from us as a board and how we best support them. The first one is around getting the engagement right, so that there's a recognition of the value that can be added to areas, because there's still that difficult bit of actually getting over to really understand the value that they can bring and work with. And the second one, which is I think partly linked to that, but also to help them going forward, is having a clinician to overview sponsor the work they're doing. That's something that they asked for. So probably looking along to the end of the table, in particular to Dave, how that might work, because I think that sort of mentoring, sponsoring bit of at a senior level to the clinical audit team would be valuable to them, and something that I think also would help a little bit on that engagement side as well. So something that,
yeah, thank you.
something to take away.
Yeah, thank you.
Other bits highlight counter fraud. We had a really good update from them, which including benchmarking, and we stand out pretty well on that. And also the actions that have been taken as a consequence of the counter fraud work that we've undertaken, and that was really positive. It's good to see. And then I'm also really pleased to be able to report that our implementation rate of recommendations from internal audit is up. So we're at 85% this year to date, which is great, and it's about that 75% threshold. So given everything else that's going on within our organisation and the pressures and the industrial action, I think this is really good performance, and it's good to be able to see. The final bit, procurement annual report, which we received. I think it goes without saying that the work our procurement department do is excellent, really good, and it was good to get that feedback through. Yeah, from my perspective, I can only say good things about all the work that Bob's doing, both in terms of procurement, but also extending that more into contract management as well.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions? Thank you. Let's move on then to finance. Andrew.
Thank you. I'll take the report as read and just highlight 1 or 2 points from it. The board assurance principal risk 4, we reviewed and decided there would be no change in it. It stands at 20, which is difficult. We also reviewed the principal risk 8 on climate change and decided that we wouldn't change that, and that remains as it is. A couple of other things I think worth mentioning is the set up of a sustainable development strategic group to further our green plan, which I think is a very positive move. And also we discussed the emergency, we evaluated the emergency department staffing business case, and we were assured by that. We have a further review in November, but we were certainly positively assured by what we heard there. So any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Good. Thank you. Quality committee, Barbara.
Thanks. In fact, we've covered some of these already in the meeting, haven't we? So decisions made really to flag up about the BAF. We've already touched on that. We also approved the patient safety incident response plan. This had been subject to a board workshopping, but this was the final approval of that. That really, just to remind colleagues, this really signifies quite a sea change in the way in which incidents are managed within the trust. So it will change what quality committee receive in future and so on. So it was good to see that piece of work coming to fruition, and we look forward to seeing it fully implemented. As referenced earlier, we're just highlighting the fact that we are now an outlier for alcoholic liver disease, appearing as a subgroup under the HSMR. But I won't rehearse because we've already talked about that, and we will have a workshop on that, and I'll leave the rest and respond to any questions that colleagues may have.
Thank you. Again, we covered quite a bit of that, haven't we?
Yeah.
People, culture and improvement.
Yes, my computer's decided to update itself. I'll take it as read. So in the positive risk areas, a lot of it's been covered at board. And what I wanted to say about committee effectiveness, it's bi-monthly and it's meant to be a 3-hour committee. It took 3.5 hours. The agenda was very ambitious and a lot of very complicated items that have been allocated 5 minutes of time. And so in terms of the ongoing work and some of the areas we want more assurance is really the improvement agenda now. So the work commissioned underway, it was really the improvement agenda. So we particularly asked for more assurance in the following areas: the improvement and transformation strategies overall, what are we trying to achieve and why, that strategic focus. The patient and people focus, what were the strategic aims and measures to achieve these aims. Patient voice was one element, so it was understanding overall what that focus was and the key levers. How hearts and minds were addressed, feelings of engagement and buy-in to achieve more clinically led efficiencies and improvements. The 5 improvement themes and the 17 programmes, monitoring on some assurance on the monitoring of progress and its impact, but then also some of the smaller projects not part of that main programme, what they were and their progress and impact, and the softer elements of the improvement work, as well as the hearts and minds, some of the cultural elements. So as you can see, a big work programme, and some of this is about the committee, do we increase the frequency and so on. Moving on to the BAF we've covered, the PR3. Moving on to and ending with the positive was, there was a lot of positive. So for example, in terms of the improvement faculty, we saw good examples with the theatre improvement programme for how the faculty works in practice. So that gave us some visibility about its role, and that was helpful. And work that's been ongoing for the last 18 months, we're really seeing the fruits of that. So the workforce plans, the tactical plans, it was really valuable to see the coordinating function, which is in Rob's team, and a frontline clinical leader presenting together and providing assurance for their different roles and how that was helping to drive improvements in those areas. The pharmacy I mentioned, it was really good there, and particularly the importance of evidence-based analysis of causes. So for example, they covered myth busting, that rather than assumptions, the myth busting, and how their evidence-based analysis and creativity around vacancies had helped to address those posts. So very positive one. And the leadership programme, the cultural heat map, another one we'd been asking for, for a while, and the work underway, because it takes time to develop these things. We can ask every month and so on. And again, seeing the fruits of that work and how working with clinical areas. So as I say, a lot of positive assurance, as well as clearly the challenges we face. Going back to that, as I said, could see some of that thriving and improvement side as much as how we maintaining and surviving with all the pressures we face.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, you shared.
I did, yeah, you're absolutely right, I did. So just going to flag up further work. A summary document's going to be developed in support of the annual report. The annual report is quite a dry document and is largely, I think, inaccessible to the general public, volunteers and the like. So trying to make that a bit more accessible. A policy, we've requested some work to develop policy regarding external funding in public areas within the trust. At the moment, it's left a bit to discretion, but it can end up being a little bit difficult for colleagues. So just being crystal clear about what's acceptable, what's not, and how those decisions are made. And scheme of delegation, and yeah, still in a healthy position. The fund is, and we've applied for some further grant through the NHS Charities COVID-19 Recovery Grants. That's a really snuffy title, isn't it? But yeah, and I have to say, it's always heartwarming to read the community involvement headline report. It really gives you a sense of what's going on, both in terms of fundraising, volunteers, and just all the good work that goes on, often behind the scenes. So really good.
Good. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing every week is signing letters of thanks to people who have donated, and the circumstances in which people have donated to our charitable funds are really, heartwarming in many cases. And whether it's a small amount or a large organisation's fundraising, all of that is so welcome and a great part of our community engagement. Graham.
Just going to add a little bit. The summary document, I think, will be really good and useful, and it'll bring a lot of those kind of stories out and put them out in the public domain. Michael showed us an example of what we used to do because we used to produce one 5-6 years ago, and then unfortunately financial reasons or otherwise it stopped. But I think it's a really good and opportune time to bring it back now as something which really highlights all the good work they do, what it's being put to, and also hopefully encourages further monies to come in as well.
Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're on to our outstanding service now. Rich, you've got a video for us on supporting young people with special educational needs and disabilities into employment.
I got involved with Project Search by accident, but it's the best thing. I can't tell you how rewarding it's been, and although we've had hurdles along the way, it's been really good.
I've been involved with Project Search since February of this year. I was approached by Jackie just to see if we were willing to come on board with this project. So Sean was the chosen person to come up here. We had a meeting before he came up, because at this time we had no idea what was going to happen. It's the first time we've been involved. I'm really happy that we actually agreed to take part in this Project Search and have the interns. We've been to employee planning meetings where actually I was surprised at how much Sean could do, bearing in mind that obviously he's come here from West Knox College with no knowledge of what he can and can't do, and he's surprised us all.
My name is Sean Cross. I work at DFM Project Search here at Kingsmill Hospital. I have done 3 other roles whilst I've been here. My first role was working down in the Skanska stores. My next role, I went over to the admin office over in Skanska, the main office. I did spreadsheets and working on the computer, organising their stock cupboard.
Initially, when Sean started, he wasn't as confident as he is now. He struggled with the paperwork side of the job initially, but over time he's grew to be more confident with it, as we've shown him how to follow the processes in the department.
Well, I found it tricky at first, but I'm getting the hang of it now. I've been doing deliveries by myself around the hospital, and I know where each tower is. I've looked to get a job here as porter. I've also learned how to answer the phone.
Taking down all the correct details as is required of him. He answers the phone in a courteous manner, which reflects well on the department.
With our interns, we do like to place, train and maintain. So hopefully place them in a placement, train them the role and maintain them, and hopefully get full paid employment.
I wouldn't be able to present PowerPoints in front of loads of people. I went up to West Knox College and presented a PowerPoint there to the future interns who are coming onto this programme.
We are employed by West Knox College, but we're on DFM Project Search and we're based here at Kingsmill Hospital.
This week we just had our employment planning meetings. I have something called a VOCFIT report.
So we use an electronic system called VOCFIT, and we put all the interns' details into there and the preferences, and then we can job match that to the different departments within the hospital.
We have plenty of support from the job coaches, so there's been Lisa in particular, and she helped him integrate initially. So she worked alongside him in the clean room and delivery whilst he found his feet and gained his confidence, and that really helped to ease him into the role in the department and get comfortable with the aspects of the job.
So we fully support the students within the role, and that can be from a full day or for a few hours, and then by the end of the placement they will be fully independent, knowing the role.
They'll look after you, they'll make sure that nothing happens to you, and it's a very suitable programme for jobs.
So we've had 3 interns this year. But our new cohort for September, we have 7 placements already accepted, with a view on another placement, so hopefully 8 interns.
It can be a bit scary and daunting at first, but I would highly recommend it. It's been a lovely journey for both South and for Sean, and he's a confident young man that's going to be leaving us at the end of this week. He goes out and about, he meets lots of people. I've had the comment, how come he's not been here very long, but he knows more people than we do, and we've been here several years. Please get on board with this project, and I'm going to be taking quite a lot away from this, from my own skills, actually talking to somebody like Sean. He's taught us just as much as we've taught him.
After watching the video, I'd like to say I hope you've been really inspired by it, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to Skanska, Medirest and the decontamination team because they've been part of this year's rotations, and it's been fantastic. I'd just like to say how inspiring it's been for the interns as well as the departments, because everybody has got so much out of it. And for the interns, it's not just about their year here, it's about the rest of their lives and what we've been able to achieve to help them moving forward with independence. The last thing I would like to say is we need you. We need any departments that think that even if you just want a chat, 20-30 minutes, face to face, over Teams, just to talk about it, because you may have a role that we need. So please give us a call.
That's just brilliant, isn't it?
That's so
That's what we should be doing. Rich?
Yeah, thank you. I think that video's probably had an impact on everyone else as it did on me the first time I saw it, and I had the privilege, I think as Paul did as well, of meeting the interns and also attending their graduation day a few weeks ago. It was amazing. It was wonderful to see Sean, Drew and Nathan getting their certificates and how proud they felt about it, but also how much they developed and the fact that they were able to stand up in front of everyone and talk about their experiences. I think they've all learned skills that will help them to become more independent, and ultimately the aim of the programme is to get people into meaningful employment, and it's really heartening to see that 2 of the 3 interns have already found a role within Sherwood Forest. I'd also like to just point out that there's a lot of work gone on with colleagues here and our partners at the college and with Project Search and ScanScrew and MediRest. So a massive thank you to them. You'll have seen Jackie there. I think she'd probably say it's changed her life, to be honest. The amount that she's taken out of it. So I would encourage anyone to think about how we might be able to support this in different areas of the organisation, and let's not underestimate the impact that these interns can make.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's been a real smile on faces as I was looking around you all. But it's good to see us doing those things. Okay, so communications to the wider organisation, cool.
Okay, thank you. So in a few notes, so we welcome our newly appointed governors in the room. We could have got understanding of the increased risks that the upcoming industrial action bring, and in a really helpful and supportive conversation in terms of supporting the execs in the planning process. Importance of supporting colleagues to speak up, but also the importance of ensuring that our leaders are there to listen and take positive action. The importance of the role of the operating department practitioner and the positive impact that staff group have on patient experience and outcomes. We reviewed our new integrated performance report and reflected on those areas that we would have liked some improvement on, and we've agreed some various mechanisms will do that. And then lastly, as we've just seen, really pleased to see Project Search video and the role that Jackie and wider trust members are supporting young people with special educational needs and disabilities into employment, and really celebrate the fact that 2 out of the 3 interns have already been offered substantive roles within the trust. So we thank MediRest for offering opportunities for.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I'm not aware of any other business, so we have the date of the next meeting of 7th of September, and I'm going to declare the meeting closed and ask our observer today, or observers, if there was any particular questions. Don't you have? No questions. We haven't received any questions from members of the public. So therefore, in accordance with section 1 part 2 of the Public Bodies Admittance to Meetings Act 1960, members of the board are invited to resolve that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of this meeting, having regard to the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity of which would be prejudicial to the public interest. So thank you all. Thank you for your attendance. We'll take a lunch break now, and let's return. Running a bit late, so let's return at quarter past 1. That should be okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.